Hey legends, welcome to Omni Wizard. Buckle up for today's story. What if Harry Potter was raised by Bruce Wayne and trained to destroy dark wizards? A like and subscribe goes a long way. Now let's jump in. Chapter 1. The wrong doorstep. The motorcycle hit 150 miles per hour somewhere over Yorkshire, and the giant riding it didn't seem to notice. Rubeus Hagrid had been flying for 3 hours with a baby tucked inside his coat, and the baby hadn't cried once. That struck him as strange in the numb, faraway way that everything struck him as strange tonight. Lily and James were dead. He'd carried Harry out of the rubble himself, stepping over a wall that used to be a nursery, and the boy had looked up at him with those green eyes, Lily's eyes unmistakably, and made a small sound like a question. The scar on the baby's forehead was still fresh. It would probably always be fresh. Hagrid wiped his face with the back of his hand and adjusted course. Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey. Professor Dumbledore had given him the address with the quiet certainty he used for everything, and Hagrid had nodded, because you nodded when Dumbledore spoke in that tone. The man had a way of making the map of events feel like it had already been drawn. The baby shifted inside his coat. One tiny fist had worked its way out and was curling and uncurling around nothing. "Nearly there, Harry," Hagrid said, voice thickening. "Nearly there." He didn't see the second motorcycle. It had been running dark, no headlight, no exhaust flare, engine noise absorbed into the general complaint of the October wind, and it pulled out of a farm road 200 feet below him and held there, hovering. The man riding it had no beard. He had a cape, articulated body armor, and lenses that caught no light at all. Batman watched the flying motorcycle for 4 seconds, clocked its heading, made a calculation, and opened the throttle. He hadn't been following Hagrid specifically. He'd been following the energy signature for 6 hours. It had started as an anomaly on the long-range sensors Bruce kept pointed at the ionosphere, a category of monitoring that even Lucius Fox had filed under eccentric billionaire indulgences without asking follow-up questions. The signature was unlike anything Bruce had logged, not electromagnetic, not chemical, not radioactive in any classification IAEA would recognize. It was something else, and Bruce's relationship with something else was simple. He cataloged it until he understood it, and he did not stop until he did. He'd triangulated the origin point to rural Scotland. By the time he reached Scotland, there was a second signature, smaller, precise, almost elegant, radiating out of a village called Godric's Hollow. He'd arrived to find emergency vehicles on the edge of town and a pub full of people in what he initially assessed as fancy dress, drinking and laughing and crying in equal measure. He'd watched from a rooftop for 11 minutes. The word you know who came up frequently enough to constitute a pattern. So did the boy who lived. Then a large man on a flying motorcycle had taken off from the north end of the village, holding something small and warm. Bruce had followed. He wasn't sure what he was going to do when he caught up. That was unusual for him. He generally preferred to have a plan. Hagrid sat down on Privet Drive at just past midnight. Number 4 was dark, curtains drawn, the kind of aggressively ordinary house that announced its ordinariness like a man protesting too much. Hagrid dismounted with the baby still cradled against his chest and stood on the pavement and looked at the doorstep and felt something crack open behind his ribs. He'd known Lily Evans since she was a girl. She used to send him frogs from the Hogwarts lake because she knew he liked them. He set Harry down on the step as gently as he'd ever done anything. The baby blinked up at him. The letter from Dumbledore was tucked in beside him. Hagrid looked at the number on the door, 4 brass numerals polished, and thought about the people inside who didn't know yet, who were asleep in their ordinary house with their ordinary lives, and who were going to wake up to something they hadn't asked for. "You'll be all right," Hagrid told Harry. His voice had gone to pieces. "Professor Dumbledore says so." The baby made the questioning sound again. "I know," Hagrid said. "I know it's cold." "It won't be for long, Harry, I promise you. Step away from the child." The voice came from directly behind him and had no warmth in it at all. Hagrid spun, which took a moment given his size, and found a man standing in the middle of the empty road. Dressed in black, standing very still in the particular way that dangerous things stood still, like the stillness was a cold thing rather than an absent one. Hagrid had faced trolls, dragons, blast-ended scroots, and Lord Voldemort's inner circle. He was not by disposition a man who frightened easily. Something about this man's stillness, though, made the hairs on the back of his neck come up. "Hooray you," Hagrid demanded. "That's not the relevant question." The man looked past him at the baby on the doorstep. Something shifted in the body language, barely perceptible, but Bruce Wayne had spent 15 years learning to read the bodies of people who were trying not to be read. The baby was awake. The baby was watching him. "The relevant question is why you're leaving a child on a doorstep at 12:15 in the morning in October. He'll be safe here. His mother's sister lives here. There are protections. He's 1 year old and it's 4 degrees Celsius. You don't understand? Then explain it to me." Hagrid opened his mouth, closed it, and then saw something move in the shadows behind the man in the black suit. Two of them. Dressed differently, dark clothes, quick movements, not the same kind of dangerous as the man in front but operational, purposeful. One of them was reaching toward where Hagrid had set Harry down. Hagrid's reaction was not complicated. He bellowed, surged forward, and placed himself between the reaching figure and the child. The pink umbrella he carried everywhere, which was, in fact, a wand badly disguised, came up fast. What happened next was very quick. The man in the black suit moved first. Not toward Hagrid, toward his own operative. There was a sharp sound of impact, a grunt, and the operative went down. The second one stopped moving. The man straightened, rolled one shoulder, and looked at Hagrid with an expression the giant couldn't read through those white lenses. "They're not mine," the man said, voice completely level. "League of Shadows, they've been tracking the energy signature since it detonated in Scotland." He paused. "You should probably pick up the child." Hagrid grabbed Harry. The baby, with remarkable composure, grabbed one of Hagrid's fingers and held on. "How do you know about?" Hagrid stopped. "Who are you?" The man looked at the baby for a long moment. "Someone who lost his parents to senseless violence," Bruce Wayne said quietly, "when he was 8. Dumbledore arrived 22 minutes later, which meant he'd already been close. He appeared at the end of Privet Drive with no pop or crack of apparition. He simply walked out of a shadow that hadn't been there a moment before, his half-moon glasses slightly askew, his silver hair uncharacteristically disordered. He stopped when he saw the man in the black armor standing next to Hagrid. Stopped and went very still himself. Bruce watched the old man assess him. It was the most comprehensive assessment he'd been subjected to since Ra's al Ghul, which was not a comparison he made lightly. "Remarkable," Dumbledore said, and his tone was genuinely uncertain for perhaps the first time in years. "I confess I had not accounted for this particular variable." "You left a child on a doorstep," Bruce said. "I'm going to need more than variable." Dumbledore looked at Hagrid. Hagrid, who was still holding Harry and looked like he was prepared to stand here for the rest of time if necessary, gave a small helpless shrug. "The protections require blood," Dumbledore explained, and to his credit he met Bruce's gaze directly. "Harry's mother died protecting him. That love created something I cannot replicate in any laboratory, I suspect, which is why I gather your instruments didn't know what to make of it. If Harry is placed with Lily's sister, those protections activate. He'll be safe from the Dark Lord's remaining followers. And from the 2 men I just neutralized who were already here waiting for him." Dumbledore's gaze moved to the 2 unconscious figures. His expression shifted into something that was not quite concern but adjacent to it. "The League of Shadows," he murmured. "I had not anticipated their interest would be so immediate." "They have a category for magical energy signatures," Bruce said. "Which means they've encountered this world before, and I suspect you know that." Silence, the kind that answered a question. "The protections," Bruce said, "are dependent on him living with these specific people. With his blood relatives, yes, and if he doesn't live with them." Dumbledore studied him. The baby in Hagrid's arms had gone to sleep, which struck Bruce as either admirable or concerning. "The protections would not form, he would be unshielded, but alive. Mister, I'll take him." The words were out before Bruce had fully formed the decision. He recognized the feeling. It was the same thing that had happened when he'd decided to become Batman, when he'd taken in Dick Grayson, when he'd gone back into the burning building for Commissioner Gordon's case files 3 years ago. Somewhere below the level of deliberate thought, the right thing had a weight to it. "You would take him," Dumbledore repeated slowly. "A child with a target on his back that every Death Eater in England would recognize. A child with magic he cannot yet control in a world where you are, forgive me, entirely without defenses against it. I have resources. You have money. Those aren't the same thing," Bruce agreed, "but the people who conflate them tend to underestimate me. I'm comfortable with that." Dumbledore looked at him for a very long time. The October wind moved through the empty street. Somewhere in number 4, a light clicked on upstairs. "There is another consideration," Dumbledore said. "Harry is important to the wizarding world in ways I cannot yet fully explain without, then don't explain them yet." Bruce's voice was even. "But understand that if you have plans for him that involve using a child as a mechanism, we are going to have a very different conversation later." He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't moved. But Dumbledore, who had faced Dark Lords, 3 wars, and more scheming politicians than any man should survive, took a small involuntary step backward. Hagrid looked between them, then he looked down at Harry, who was asleep in his arms, and his expression did something complicated. "He should be with family," Hagrid said gruffly. "That's what Professor Dumbledore always says." "Family is made," Bruce said, "not assigned." He held out his arms. Hagrid, who was an enormous man with enormous hands and an enormous heart, looked at this person he'd known for 20 minutes who wore body armor and had opinions. And then he looked at the doorstep of number 4, and he thought about the brass numeral 4 and the polished ordinary life behind it, and he handed over the baby. Harry didn't wake up. His head settled against Bruce's shoulder with the boneless certainty of someone who had decided this was fine. "I'll need everything you know about his world," Bruce told Dumbledore. "About the threats, the factions, the people who will come looking for him, all of it. That could take considerable time. I have a very good coffee maker." Dumbledore spent 4 hours at Wayne Manor, which Alfred brought to Bruce's attention by appearing in the study doorway at 4 in the morning with an expression of the most exquisitely calibrated neutrality. "The gentleman in the purple robes is on his 3rd cup," Alfred said. "He's also catalogued your library in a way that suggests he's memorized it." "He has," Bruce said without looking up from his notes. "He's also been reading the section on Renaissance cryptography for the past 20 minutes because it's the only shelf he hasn't seen before." Alfred looked at the baby asleep in the chair Bruce had lined with his own jacket. Harry was curled on his side, one fist against his cheek, breathing with the improbable serenity of someone who did not know that his entire world had been destroyed 12 hours ago. "And the child?" Alfred asked. "His name is Harry. His parents were murdered last night. He's 1 year old." Bruce finally looked up. "I told him I'd take him." Alfred's face did several things quietly. Then he straightened his jacket, walked to the chair, and studied Harry with an expression Bruce recognized from the old photographs of Alfred holding a 6-month-old Bruce on the lawn at Goodwood, the summer before Thomas Wayne had gotten rich enough to move to Gotham. "He'll need formula," Alfred said. "I'll have the kitchen order some. It's 4 in the morning. I know a man." Alfred looked at the scar on the baby's forehead and his mouth tightened by a fraction. "Does the scar hurt him? I don't know yet. Dumbledore thinks it might be a connection of some kind to the man who gave it to him." Bruce's jaw tightened. "I intend to understand it before he does." Alfred nodded once, crisply, like a man settling something with himself. "Well," Alfred said, "I survived raising you. I expect I'll manage." Harry Potter learned to walk in the East Gallery of Wayne Manor, between a suit of Japanese armor and a Flemish oil painting of a man who looked extremely disappointed in everyone. He learned to talk by following Alfred around the kitchen, narrating everything Alfred did with the focused commentary of someone who found the world endlessly interesting. Alfred encouraged this. Bruce, listening from the hallway with a case file in his hand, found himself pausing mid-read to hear what the kid would say next. He learned to read before he was 4. Bruce hadn't pushed it. Harry had simply picked up a copy of The Economist from the coffee table, stared at it for 10 minutes, and then asked Alfred what fiscal policy meant. Alfred had explained it and Harry had nodded, and 2 days later he'd asked a follow-up question that made Alfred set down his tea very carefully and go find Bruce. He made a logical connection, Alfred said, between monetary supply and social inequality. "He's 3.5, Bruce said. "Yes, thank you for that precision." The magic started around the same time. Nothing dramatic, objects sliding across tables when Harry was frustrated, lights flickering when he laughed hard enough. A glass once fell off a shelf and stopped 6 inches from the floor, hanging in the air for 10 full seconds while Harry looked at it with an expression of intense academic interest. He caught it before it could fall the rest of the way, turned it in his hands and showed it to Alfred. "It did a floating," Harry announced. "So it did," Alfred agreed and went to find Bruce again. Bruce added a wing of research to the manor's lower levels specifically for understanding Harry's abilities. He corresponded carefully and through intermediaries with certain academics at Cambridge and Edinburgh who had documented anomalous physical phenomena. He reached back out to Dumbledore through a channel they had agreed on and extracted everything the old wizard would give him about childhood magical development. He read, he tested, he documented. He did not notably try to stop it. "It's part of him," Bruce told Alfred one evening watching Harry in the garden through the window. The 4-year-old had coaxed a robin onto his finger by some method that involved sitting very still and apparently talking to it. Suppressing it would be like suppressing his ability to think. "I'm not going to do that. He'll need training," Alfred observed. "Eventually. I know, I'm working on how. He'll also need the ability to fail at things in a safe environment." Bruce glanced sideways. "I know, because your relationship with failure is, and I say this with love, pathological. I'm aware. I'm simply noting that small children are supposed to fall over and get dusty and occasionally walk into doors." "He walked into a door last week." "Into, yes, through would have been remarkable." Bruce almost smiled. It had been happening more since Harry, that near smile. Alfred tracked it with the precision of a man who'd been waiting 15 years to see it. Training started when Harry was 5, and it started the way Bruce started everything, with fundamentals, not combat, not yet. Observation. Awareness, pattern recognition. Bruce would take Harry through Gotham on what they called walkabouts, which Alfred understood to be a parenting strategy, and what they actually were was field exercises in environmental reading. Bruce would ask questions. "What's wrong with that man's left shoe? Why is the woman at the 3rd window watching the street? What does the cigarette but tell you about how long someone was standing at that corner? Harry, to Bruce's perpetual astonishment, was consistently good at this. Not good in the way a trained detective was good in the instinctive way, the way some people were musical. He would tilt his head and look at something for 3 seconds and produce an answer that took Bruce a moment to reverse engineer. "That man's tired," Harry said once, pointing at a pedestrian across the street. He was 6, but not from sleeping, from not eating. Bruce looked at the man, pale, moving slowly but well-dressed, nothing obviously wrong. "What makes you say that?" Harry squinted. "His belt's on the wrong hole, not the worn one, and his hands shake a little. Like yours do when you miss lunch." Bruce did not miss lunch. But he understood the observation, and he filed away the data point about Harry noticing things about him with the complicated feeling of a man who was not accustomed to being read. The physical training started at 6. Yoga first, then gymnastics, balance, and body awareness before any kind of contact work. Alfred supervised the gymnastics with the expression of a man watching someone install something he knows will eventually cause chaos. He was right. Harry took to it with an enthusiasm that led, within 6 months, to him routinely being in places he was not supposed to be, including the roof of the carriage house, the upper gallery of the main staircase, and memorably the top of the grandfather clock in the hall, which was 11 feet from the floor. He looked down at Alfred and said, "I can see the garden from here," with the complete satisfaction of someone who had accomplished a meaningful goal. Alfred had said, "How lovely," and gotten a ladder. Bruce started martial arts work at 7. Traditional first, he wanted Harry to understand the philosophy before the technique. Shotokan karate, then Brazilian jiu-jitsu, then the beginning elements of Muay Thai. Harry had a gift for it that was slightly different from Bruce's own. Bruce was a grinder. He achieved mastery through obsessive repetition and an ability to absorb pain that most of his sensei had found alarming. Harry was intuitive. He watched a technique, ran it through whatever mental machinery he had, and produced a version that was often technically different from the original but functionally superior for his body type. It led to some arguments. "That's not the form," Bruce said. "I know, the form puts my weight wrong for my height," Harry demonstrated slowly. "This way I don't lose the leverage when I transition." Bruce looked at the demonstration, absorbed it. "Show me again." Harry was 8. He was right. The magic, meanwhile, was becoming impossible to contain in any conventional sense. Objects didn't just slide now, they rearranged. Lights didn't just flicker, they changed color. Once, during a thunderstorm that clearly wanted to be bigger than it was, Harry stood on the back terrace and looked up at the clouds, and the lightning changed direction. Once. "Did you do that?" Bruce asked. Harry looked at his hands. "I don't know how I did it." "That's fine, we figure out the how. The fact that you can do it is just data." He paused. "Were you angry, excited?" "Both." "Okay, write it down, everything you felt, I'll read it tonight." This became the system. Harry kept a journal of his magical experiences with the same rigor Bruce kept case files. It served multiple purposes. It trained Harry to observe and document his own internal states, which was useful for a child with wildly unpredictable abilities. It gave Bruce a data set. And it gave Harry a sense of ownership over something that could have felt frightening and instead felt like a field of inquiry. Alfred's contribution to all this was, characteristically, the human element. He taught Harry to cook. He read to him every night until Harry was old enough to read to himself, and then started recommending the books with a subtlety Harry didn't catch until he was older and realized the reading list had been carefully calibrated. He took him to museums and cricket matches, and once memorably to the opera, where Harry sat through 3 hours of Wagner with an expression of intense critical concentration and afterwards told Alfred that the story made logical sense if you thought of the gods as a kind of dysfunctional board of directors. Alfred had laughed until he had to sit down, and Harry had looked quietly pleased, which was his favorite expression to earn. Bruce took Harry to Gotham's criminal courts 3 times a year. He wanted him to understand systems, how they worked, where they failed, what the failure cost. He took him to the free clinic in the East End where Leslie Tompkins worked, and Harry spent an afternoon following Leslie around asking questions about emergency medicine that she answered with visible delight because nobody had ever asked them with such pure, unembarrassed curiosity. "He's remarkable," Leslie told Bruce, walking out while Harry sat with a 7-year-old with a broken arm and kept him calm through what was clearly sheer force of interesting conversation. "I know," Bruce said. "Are you training him to be you?" Bruce was quiet for a moment. "I'm training him to be better." Leslie looked at Harry, who was making the 7-year-old laugh about something, eyes bright behind the round glasses Bruce had got him when they discovered he was severely nearsighted. "I think you might be succeeding," she said, "which will probably terrify you." "It already does," Bruce said quietly, and Leslie gave him the look she'd been giving him since he was young enough to deserve it, which was compassionate and slightly exasperated. The letter arrived when Harry was 10. It came the way Dumbledore had warned it would, addressed in green ink on thick parchment to Mr. H. Potter, the East Study, Wayne Manor, Gotham City. The supernatural accuracy of the address had been enough to make Alfred hold it at arm's length while locating Bruce. Bruce read it. Harry read it over his shoulder because Harry was constitutionally unable to be in the same room as an unread document without reading it. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Harry said. Yes. Is that real? You made lightning change direction when you were 8, Bruce said. So I'd work from the assumption that yes, it is. Harry picked up the letter and read it again more slowly. Bruce watched him and waited the way he waited for important things, completely still, completely present, everything else set aside. You knew this was coming, Harry said. Dumbledore mentioned it when you were very small. And I spent the past 9 years making sure that if and when you walked into that world you'd walk in with everything I could give you. Bruce paused. It's your choice, it has to be. Harry set the letter down on the desk and looked out the window at the manor's grounds, the long lawn going gold in the evening light. He was quiet for almost a minute, which was a long time for him. There'll be things there I can't do yet, he said. Magic-specific things. Yes, and things they can't do that I can. Almost certainly. Harry nodded slowly, the way he did when he was running something through its logical conclusion. And there are people there who want to kill me. Voldemort's followers, yes, some of them, possibly him, though Dumbledore believes he's diminished. Bruce's voice stayed level. Which is one reason I want you to go. Harry looked at him. If he's going to come back, Bruce said, I'd rather have you in the same world when he does, trained and informed, than have you find out from a newspaper 10 years from now. That's a very Batman kind of reason. I didn't say it was the only reason. Bruce was quiet for a moment. There will be things there, people, experiences that I can't give you, a different kind of learning. His jaw worked. I'm not good at gaps, but I know they exist. Harry picked up the letter one more time, then he looked up with an expression that Bruce recognized because he'd seen it in mirrors for the past 30 years, the specific look of someone who has decided to walk into something difficult and is not afraid and is ready. I'll need a trunk, Harry said, a good one with compartments. Alfred's already ordered 3, Harry almost smiled. Of course he has. He set the letter down. Bruce. Yes. I want to understand the whole world, the whole thing. Magical and not. His voice was steady, completely sure of itself. If there's a war coming in that world, I want to end it, not wait for it to end. Bruce looked at his son, which was what Harry was in any way that mattered, and felt that combination of pride and dread that he suspected was the fundamental condition of parenthood. Then we have a year, Bruce said. Let's not waste it. That year was the most intensive of Harry's life, and his life had not, by any measure, been relaxed. Bruce reached out to Dumbledore and extracted as much information about the wizarding world's current state as the old man would give. He cross-referenced it with the files he'd been building for a decade, reports from his international contacts, documentation of unusual events, the thin trail of breadcrumbs he'd been following on what the League of Shadows had been doing since the incident on Privet Drive. There was a name that kept coming up in the older files. Tom Riddle, then he who must not be named. Then Voldemort. Bruce added everything to Harry's reading. Harry went through it in 10 days and came back with questions that took Bruce 3 evenings to answer. He's afraid of death, Harry said at the end of one of these sessions. That's the assessment. That's not an ideology. That's a panic response with a body count. Harry was thoughtful, turning his pen between his fingers. He got other people to be afraid of him so he'd stop being afraid of himself. More or less. That's manageable, Harry said. Fear-based systems have structural weaknesses. The person at the top has to keep generating fear to maintain control. It's exhausting and eventually it fails. It is and it does, but it can do an enormous amount of damage in the meantime. I know. Harry's hand stilled on the pen. His followers killed my parents. Yes, I'm not going to. Harry stopped, restarted. I don't feel what you feel about your parents, about Joe Chill. I was too young. But I understand what they took. Bruce said nothing. Sometimes the most important thing was to not fill a silence. I won't let it make me cruel, Harry said. It wasn't a declaration. It was quieter than that, more like a thing he was telling himself that he needed to say out loud to make it real. That's what it does to people, right? Loss that big, it makes them cruel or it makes them cold. Or it makes them build something, Bruce said. Harry looked at him. Then he nodded once and picked up the pen again and went back to his notes. They found Diagon Alley in August, which was an adventure in detection that Harry enjoyed more than almost anything in recent memory. Dumbledore had given them the entry point, the leaky cauldron, and the method, but navigating it, reading the faces of the crowd, cataloging the impossible things for sale in the shop windows occupied every sense Harry had. He got his wand at Ollivander's. The wandmaker had no record of him, which surprised the old man and not Harry. 11 wands failed before Ollivander reached for the box containing holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, and had the expression of someone remembering something uncomfortable. Curious, Ollivander murmured when it lit the shop with warm gold light. Curious. The feather's brother, Harry said. He'd read about it. Voldemort's wand. Ollivander's eyes widened. I know about a lot of things. Harry examined the wand. The light was still in his palm, warm and steady. Is this going to be a problem? No, the wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter. Whatever the connection means, I'll figure it out, Harry said and put the wand in his pocket with the simple confidence of someone adding a tool to a kit. He bought every core textbook. Then he bought books that weren't on the list. Defense Against the Dark Arts Advanced Theory. Transfiguration, Volumes 3 through 5. A history of magical conflict that looked like it hadn't been opened in 40 years. Hermione Granger, in the same bookshop with her mother, watched this with wide eyes over the top of a display of Standard Book of Spells and thought that she had never seen another child her age buy books like someone preparing for a war. She debated saying something, then she decided it would be strange. Then the boy looked up from the shelf and caught her eye and said, "The flammable references in the magical history section are worth reading if you haven't already," and went back to the shelf. Hermione blinked. She found the section. He was right. She watched him leave the bookshop with a trunk that was somehow not falling over despite holding significantly more books than should be possible, and thought about what he'd said, and decided she would find out who he was on the train. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 in the morning on the 1st of September, and Harry Wayne stood on platform 9 3/4 with a wand in his pocket, and 11 years of the best preparation one mortal billionaire and one extremely competent butler could provide, and felt the specific feeling he'd learned to recognize as the moment before something important began. Alfred had said goodbye at King's Cross with a handshake that became a brief, firm embrace that neither of them mentioned. Bruce had handed him a slim communications device disguised as a Muggle pen, encrypted, powered by something Wayne Enterprises was calling ambient field technology that ought to work in a magic-saturated environment. They'd tested it and said daily check-ins. Twice weekly, Harry said. Daily would attract attention. Bruce had looked at him. Twice weekly, he agreed. Harry had one foot on the train steps when Bruce said, "Harry." He looked back. Bruce Wayne, who was Batman, who had stared down gods and criminals and the worst that two cities could produce, looked for a moment like a man who was not sure how to say a thing. He found it anyway. "You don't have to be afraid of anything in there," Bruce said. "But if you are, for any reason, I will burn that castle down and build you a better one." Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "I know," and stepped up onto the train, and the door closed and the whistle sounded, and the Hogwarts Express began to move. He found an empty compartment, stowed his trunk, sat down, and opened the window to watch the platform until it disappeared. Bruce was still standing there when the train took the curve. Not waving, just watching, the specific stillness of a man who had learned not to look away from important things. Harry watched until there was nothing left to see. Then he opened a history of dark magical conflicts 1000 to 1800 and began to read. The girl from the bookshop found him 20 minutes later, knocked on the compartment door and said, "I'm Hermione Granger. You said something about flammel." Harry put down the book. "Sit down," he said. "It's a long ride." The castle was somewhere ahead of them in the dark, full of things Harry didn't know yet. He was looking forward to learning them. He was looking forward to everything. Chapter 2. The Boy Who Wasn't Afraid the Sorting Hat Talked Too Much. Harry had read about it, Hogwarts. A History, Chapter 11, the enchanted artifact created by the 4 founders to continue their work of selection after their deaths. But the text had not prepared him for the actual experience of having a thinking, opinionated piece of headgear dropped onto his skull in front of 400 children. "Well," said a voice that seemed to come from somewhere behind his eyes. "This is unusual." Harry waited. "In 43 years of sorting, I have never placed a hat on a head that felt like a 'what is this?' Training, so much training." And something underneath it, the hat went quiet for a moment in the particular way of something that had just found an unexpected room in a house it thought it knew. "You have a remarkable mind, young man." "Thanks," Harry thought back. "Where do you want me?" The hat made a sound like a very old man being pleasantly surprised. "Direct, I like that. Most children are terrified at this point. I've been in worse situations." "Have you?" At 11, a pause. Yes, I suppose you have." The hat shifted, or seemed to. It was hard to tell what the physical sensation of a thinking hat adjusting itself was actually like. "Let's see. Courage, obviously. Plenty of that, though yours is the cold kind, not the hot kind. Most Gryffindors have hot courage, it moves before the brain does. Yours waits. Is that a problem? Not for Gryffindor, not for any house really, it's rarer, that's all. Hufflepuff would value your loyalty and you have it in depth, not easily given but absolute once placed. Ravenclaw, well, the hunger for knowledge is evident, but it's instrumental for you. You learn things because they're useful, not because learning is the point." Another pause, and Slytherin. Harry said nothing. "Don't bristle. Ambition and cunning are tools, not character flaws. You have both. The question is what you use them for." The hat seemed to be thinking now in the way that had weight to it. But I think you know what you're here for. And I think the place that serves that purpose best is Gryffindor. The red and gold table erupted. Harry lifted the hat off his head, set it on the stool with a nod that startled the hat enough that it nearly said something further, and walked to the Gryffindor table with his hands in his pockets. He sat down at the end of a bench near a pair of twin boys with matching grins who were already leaning toward each other to say something, and across from a red-headed boy who'd been sorted 3 names before Harry and was watching him with the expression of someone trying to decide whether to be nervous or excited. "I'm Ron," the boy said. "Harry." He offered his hand. Ron shook it like someone who'd been taught to shake hands and was glad for the chance to demonstrate it. "You're Harry Potter," one of the twins said. His voice wasn't accusatory, more genuinely delighted, the way someone might announce they'd found a 20-pound note on the pavement. "Our mum wrote us 4 letters about you before term 4. George," the other twin said seriously, "I think we should be his friends." "Fred, I think you're right." "I'm open to the concept," Harry said, and the twins stared at him for half a second before simultaneously grinning, which gave Harry the impression of watching a single mechanism operate 2 faces. Down the table, Hermione Granger was watching him from her new seat at the Gryffindor table with the same expression she'd worn on the train. Cataloging, curious, running assessments. They'd spent the last 2 hours of the journey talking about Nicholas Flamel, the history of alchemy, 3 different theories about the nature of wandless magic, and whether there was a logical unified theory connecting potion science and transfiguration at the molecular level. She'd started the conversation clearly expecting to end up explaining things. By the 15-minute mark she had straightened up in her seat and stopped talking to listen, and that, Harry had gathered, was not something Hermione Granger did frequently. He caught her eye now, and she gave him a small, precise nod, like they'd confirmed something. On the staff table, Professor Quirrell was watching Harry with an expression of naked intensity that he covered the instant Harry glanced in his direction. He was a slight man with a stammer and a turban that seemed, given the September warmth in the hall, to serve some purpose beyond decoration. He was the only person at the staff table who had looked at Harry with that particular quality of attention, hungry and calculating behind a surface of nervous benignity. Harry looked away and helped himself to roast chicken. Ron stared at the chicken. "I didn't know it just appeared like that," he said, slightly reverent. "House elves," Harry said, "kitchen staff. The castle employs them." Ron looked impressed. "How do you know that already?" "I read the school's founding history over the summer. The kitchen staff arrangements are in Chapter 7. Harry paused. "It's worth reading at some point. The political history of how Hogwarts governs itself is actually quite interesting." Ron looked at him for a moment, then back at the chicken, then back at him. "Are you going to be weird about knowing things?" he asked with the directness of someone who'd grown up with 6 siblings and had no patience for dancing around a question. "Probably," Harry said. "Does that bother you?" "Not really. My brother Percy's weird about knowing things and he's insufferable, but he's weird about it at you if you know what I mean, like he wants you to know that he knows." "I'm not interested in impressing anyone," Harry said. Ron considered this seriously. "Yeah," he said, "all right, that's fine then." It was, Harry thought, one of the more efficient friendship agreements he'd made. The dungeons under Hogwarts, Draco Malfoy had been told his whole life, were where real wizards were sorted. His father had said this with the satisfaction of a man pointing to a family crest. It was a finished thing, an already determined fact, and Draco had absorbed it the way he'd absorbed most things his father said, completely, unquestioningly, and with the specific confidence of someone who had never been given a reason to question. He'd arrived at Hogwarts expecting deference. He'd grown up with it, the way people spoke to his father, moved when he entered rooms, modulated themselves in his presence. It hadn't occurred to Draco that this deference was a function of his father's position, rather than an inherent quality of the Malfoy name. In the same way it doesn't occur to a fish that the water is a specific feature of its particular pond. His first indication that this year might not go the way he'd planned came on the Hogwarts Express, when he'd found the compartment where the Potter boy was sitting with a Muggleborn and a Weasley, and had delivered the speech he'd been mentally rehearsing since August, the one about good families and knowing one's place, and the Potter boy had looked at him with total, uncomplicated attention and said nothing at all until Draco ran out of words. Then Harry had said, "Is that everything?" Draco had stared at him. "I beg your pardon. I want to make sure you're finished before I respond. Was that everything you wanted to say?" Yes, okay." Harry had gone back to his book. "Malfoy, I don't have any issue with you personally, but I'm going to be honest with you because I think it's more useful than being polite. The speech you just gave tells me more about how you were raised than anything else. I'm not offended by it. But I'm also not going to pretend it made sense, because it didn't." Draco had gone a specific shade of red that Ron would later describe as the color of a tomato that's personally offended. Who do you think you are, Harry Potter? Clearly, you said that yourself. Your family, my family, Harry said with a patience that was somehow more irritating than anger would have been, includes one of the most capable men I know. You'd probably call him a muggle. I'd suggest not saying that in my presence, but that's your call. The compartment had gone very quiet. Even Hermione, who had the instinct to de-escalate, didn't say anything, because something in Harry's voice made the room feel like a place where speech required permission. Draco had left. He'd spent the rest of the train ride being furious about it in the Slytherin compartment, and Crabbe and Goyle had agreed with him loudly because they agreed with everything he said, and Pansy Parkinson had made sympathetic noises, and none of it had made him feel better because what Harry had said wasn't something you could argue with. It wasn't an insult. It was an observation. You couldn't fight an observation. Now, 2 weeks into term, Draco had developed a habit of watching Harry in shared classes, with the specific watchfulness of someone trying to find a flaw they can use. The problem was that Harry was infuriatingly difficult to dismiss. He didn't answer every question in class, he answered the right questions at the right moments with the precision of someone who understood which information was important and which was noise. He moved through the castle like he already knew it, though he'd been there less than a month. He didn't seem impressed by anything, but equally didn't seem contemptuous of it. What irritated Draco most was that Harry didn't care about him. Not in a pointed, deliberate way, the way you don't care about someone to show them you don't care. He genuinely didn't. Draco existed in Harry's peripheral awareness the way furniture did, noted, accounted for, not particularly interesting unless it became relevant. He mentioned this to his father in a letter once. His father's response was brief and had the quality of someone who had been told something that confused him. Make yourself relevant. That is how Malfoys operate. Find his weaknesses and use them. Draco had read the letter several times and found it oddly unsatisfying. Not wrong exactly. Just somehow less than the situation required. He wasn't sure why. Charms was on Thursday mornings and the first practical session was Wingardium Leviosa. Professor Flitwick, who was small enough to stand on a stack of books at the front of the classroom and clearly preferred it that way, demonstrated with a feather that floated to the ceiling with liquid ease. Then he released the class to attempt it in pairs. Harry was paired with Ron. Hermione, 2 pairs down, had her feather airborne in 30 seconds and was attempting to get it to change direction, which Flitwick hadn't asked for but was watching with visible pleasure. Ron made his wand movement, said the incantation, and the feather skidded sideways. You're rolling the R too hard, Harry said. It's a swish, not a flick, like you're drawing a letter J with your wrist. Ron tried again, the feather moved, not much but definitely upward. That's it, Harry said. How did you know the wrist thing? Ron asked, not accusatory, genuinely curious. Bruce has a friend who does stage magic. I spent some time learning sleight of hand when I was 9. Wrist economy is the whole skill set. He paused. Also, I read Flitwick's published papers on the subject last week. He's done interesting work on the mechanical component of casting. Ron stared at him. Flitwick publishes papers. He's a former dueling champion. His academic work is excellent. Ron looked at the tiny professor with new eyes. I didn't know that. Most people don't. He doesn't advertise it. Harry raised his own wand, made the motion, said the incantation, and the feather went up smooth and level and stopped exactly 6 inches from the ceiling and stayed there. Flitwick, passing, looked up at it, looked at Harry, looked up at it again, and made a sound of academic appreciation. Harry brought it down, picked it up, and set it back on the desk. Can you do it without the incantation? Ron asked quietly. Harry glanced sideways at him. What makes you ask that? Ron shrugged, a small grin at the corner of his mouth. Hermione asked me to keep an eye on you. She thinks you're interesting. I've been noticing things. What kind of things? Like how you sometimes do things a second before you cast. Small things, objects moving, nothing that anyone who wasn't looking would catch. Ron was matter-of-fact about it, no accusation in it. I've got 6 brothers. I'm good at noticing things people aren't trying to show me. Harry studied him for a moment. Ron met his gaze with comfortable steadiness, no anxiety in it, just a person waiting to see what happened next. Yes, Harry said. Sometimes, I can't always direct it properly. But you can do it. I've been able to do it since I was small. Bruce thinks it's an unstructured form of the same thing that wand casting produces. Same energy, different delivery mechanism. Ron was quiet for a moment. That's properly mad, he said, with the tone of someone finding something mad in the very best way. Don't worry, I won't say anything. Harry nodded. Then after a moment, Ron, yeah, I appreciate that you didn't ask why I was hiding it. Ron shrugged again. Figure you've got reasons, people usually do. He picked up his wand and had another go at the feather. Also, if Malfoy found out, he'd be absolutely insufferable about it, and I'm enjoying watching him try to get a reaction from you. Has he tried talking to you about me? Twice. I told him he was being boring. Ron grinned properly now, the wide, genuine grin that reorganized his face into something very warm. He didn't like that either. Harry almost smiled. No, he agreed. I imagine not. Defense Against the Dark Arts was on Fridays, and every student in the year knew to watch it, because word had gotten around that Harry Potter was in the class, and rumor, which moved through Hogwarts at approximately the speed of a fire in a dry library, had already assigned him a legend he hadn't yet earned and showed no interest in managing. Quirrell arrived 6 minutes late, straightened his turban with nervous fingers, and spent the first 20 minutes explaining in a heavily stammered monologue what the class would cover over the year. The room smelled of garlic, not faintly aggressively as though Quirrell lived inside a clove. This served, he explained, as protection against vampires, which he appeared to find both genuinely frightening and embarrassing to admit. Harry watched him throughout the lecture. Not obviously, he appeared to be taking notes, which he was, but the notepad was a secondary focus. The primary focus was the man at the front of the room and the specific quality of his performance. Because it was a performance. Harry had grown up watching Bruce Wayne do the socialite act, the carefully assembled persona of an amiable, not very serious billionaire that served as cover for the thing underneath. He understood performed identity at a structural level. Quirrell was performing, but differently. He was performing downward, building himself smaller, adding layers of nervous tic and social anxious mannerism that said, "Don't look at me, I'm not interesting." People who added those layers usually had something underneath that would justify looking. The turban moved, not much, maybe a millimeter. But it moved, and it moved independently without a head movement to cause it, without a shift in Quirrell's posture that would explain it. It moved the way fabric moved when something beneath it shifted. Harry wrote at the bottom of his notes, turban, not decoration, function. He underlined it twice. After class, Hermione fell into step beside him in the corridor, already dissecting the lecture with the efficiency of someone who had pre-written her critique. "He barely covered anything," she said, flipping through her notes with a disappointed expression. "There's nothing there I didn't already know, and the suggested reading list is 3 years out of date. Some of those defensive texts have been superseded by—" "What did you notice about him?" Harry said. Hermione stopped flipping. "About Quirrell? Yes." She considered it seriously because Hermione took every question seriously when the question came from someone who'd earned her respect. "He's frightened of something, not the way a nervous person is frightened, more specifically. Like there's a particular thing." "Good, what else?" she thought. "The garlic is an affectation." Harry glanced at her. "It doesn't actually repel vampires," she said, with the mild irritation of someone correcting a factual error. "Not reliable garlic anyway. The actual research on vampire repulsion involves, so why wear it?" Hermione slowed her pace. "To justify covering his neck," she said, and the realization settled over her face like a cool cloth. "You've been thinking about this since before the class." "Since the first night at the feast," Harry said. "He looks at me too often and he covers it too quickly. That's the pattern of someone surveilling a target. That's a very specific way to think about a professor. It's a very specific set of behaviors." Hermione was quiet for a moment. They reached a junction in the corridor and she stopped, which made Ron, who'd been half jogging to catch up and following the conversation with his head swiveling between them, nearly run into a statue of a one-eyed witch. "Are you going to do something about it?" Hermione asked. "Not yet. Right now I'm building information. You don't move until you know what you're moving against." Harry paused. "But I'd like to know more about what's on the third-floor corridor." Hermione's eyes went wide. "Dumbledore specifically said, I know what he said." "Harry, I'm not planning to go tonight," Harry said patiently. "I'm planning to think about it. There's a difference." He looked at them both. "Dumbledore told a castle full of children that the third floor is dangerous and off-limits. That's not a prohibition. That's an invitation to every curious and powerful person in the building to find out why." Ron pointed at him. "That's exactly what he just did to us." Harry nodded. "Yes, and I'd like to know if that was deliberate." Ron and Hermione exchanged the look of two people who had just realized they were standing at the edge of something larger than a school year, and who were, despite themselves, not unhappy about it. The letter from Bruce came 12 days in, delivered not by owl but through the encrypted pen Harry kept in his jacket pocket. It clicked once in a sequence 313, their agreed signal, and Harry excused himself from the Gryffindor common room after dinner and found a window seat in an empty classroom on the third floor. "How's the castle?" Not a question. Bruce communicated like he thought, observations dressed as sentences. Harry typed back, architecturally impressive, functionally chaotic. "The moving staircases are a significant safety hazard. I've mapped the main structure to the extent possible. Threats. One confirmed area of interest. Dada Professor. Behavioral pattern consistent with dual identity or coerced operation. No evidence yet. Investigating carefully." A pause. Then, "Don't investigate alone. I have people another pause longer. Harry could almost feel the careful way Bruce was choosing words. Good people matter, then. Alfred is learning to owl. He found an owl. It's very unimpressed with him. He's very unimpressed with it. They've reached an accord. Harry sat back and let himself grin in the dark in the empty classroom, 3 floors up in a castle that was slowly becoming familiar. He typed, "Tell him I'd like treacle tart in the next package if possible." He's already made it. He anticipated, he always does, daily briefing. Harry, don't make me come up there twice weekly. My terms, remember, I remember a beat, stay sharp. Harry closed the pen and sat for a moment in the quiet classroom. Outside the window, the ground stretched dark and wide toward the forbidden forest, which was exactly as forbidden as the 3rd-floor corridor, and for which Harry had approximately the same level of academic interest. An owl crossed the moon. He picked up his notebook and added 3 new entries to his running list of questions about Hogwarts that didn't have answers yet. The Quidditch tryouts were in the 2nd week of October, and Harry didn't intend to try out. He'd learned to fly in the Manor's grounds on a borrowed broom that Alfred had acquired through Dumbledore with the expression of a man who had gone beyond the job description and was simply accepting this now. He was good at it, the spatial awareness training translated directly, and his center of gravity was well developed from the acrobatics, but Quidditch was a sport and he had other priorities. Then Professor McGonagall saw him in flying class. It wasn't anything dramatic. The first years were given basic hover and control exercises. Most of them wobbled. Harry didn't wobble. He did at one point make a 2-handed catch at an angle that required him to drop his shoulder 45 degrees and extend his body parallel to the broom to intercept a released practice ball that Neville Longbottom had accidentally launched across the pitch. He brought the ball back, set it down, and didn't think anything of it until he noticed that McGonagall was standing at the edge of the pitch with the expression of someone who had just had a professional decision made for them by the universe. Potter, her voice could strip paint when she wanted it to. This was the warmer register, slightly. Have you played Quidditch before? No, Professor. Naturally gifted, she said, half to herself, with the tone of someone rearranging furniture in their head. Come see me after dinner. He played Seeker. He hadn't wanted the distraction, but Ron had pointed out with impeccable logic that being on the Quidditch team gave him legitimate reasons to be outside after hours, access to the grounds at odd times, and regular aerial views of the castle's exterior, all of which were more useful than he'd admitted. Harry had looked at Ron for a moment and then said, "You're smarter than you let on." Ron had shrugged. "I've got 6 brothers, you learn to think sideways." The first practice was, by any objective measure, a success and a disaster in equal measure. Success because Harry's grasp of the game was intuitive and immediate. He thought spatially about the pitch the way he thought spatially about a room, tracking positions, anticipating movements, finding the line. Disaster because the other Gryffindor players, who had expected to spend the first practice working around the inexperienced first year, were instead scrambling to keep up with a seeker who kept pointing out weaknesses in plays they'd been running for 2 years. Oliver Wood, the captain, was first horrified, then delighted, then horrified again, then simply delighted in the way of someone who has stopped fighting the current. "You see the whole pitch," Oliver said after practice, slightly breathless. "Most seekers just watch the snitch zone, you watch everything. You need to know the whole field to understand any part of it," Harry said. "Right." Oliver was nodding the way people nodded when they were only partially following but definitely agreed with the energy. "Right, yes, can you be here Tuesday?" "I can be here whenever, but Oliver," Harry paused. "The beater formation on the left side leaves you vulnerable when both bludgers come right. Someone's going to figure that out." Oliver stared at him. "I've been running that formation for 3 years. I know you should change it." Oliver changed it. October moved into November with the specific grayness of a Scottish autumn that committed to the bit, perpetually damp, intermittently dramatic, the kind of weather that made the inside of the castle feel earned. The common room had a fire going most evenings, and the first years had developed the rhythm of homework and conversation and argument that was the specific texture of belonging somewhere. Harry sat in the common room on the Thursday before Halloween, working through an essay for Snape with a methodical thoroughness that was the only approach potions allowed if you wanted to understand what was actually happening at the molecular level rather than just following instructions. When Draco Malfoy walked through the portrait hole, Harry looked up, because Draco being in the Gryffindor common room was not a situation that required anything other than immediate attention. Draco, for his part, had clearly been working up to something. His expression had the set quality of a prepared speech. He stopped in the middle of the room, noticed that approximately 12 Gryffindors were now staring at him, and soldiered on with the specific willfulness of someone who had committed to a course of action that was clearly not going well. "I need to speak to Potter," he said. Fred and George from the corner made a sound like a game show buzzer. "Sorry," George said pleasantly, "this is Gryffindor territory." I'm aware, Draco said stiffly. I need Draco. Harry had gone back to his essay. Say whatever you came to say. Draco looked at him. Around the room, the 12 Gryffindors were watching with the collective interest of people at a tennis match. I wanted to say, Draco began with enormous difficulty, that you were right on the train. Nobody spoke. The fire crackled. About what? Harry said, still writing. About the speech. It was. Draco's jaw was doing something complicated. It was what my father told me. I hadn't thought about whether it made sense. I just said it. He stopped. This was clearly the end of what he'd prepared. He looked slightly appalled to be standing in a room full of Gryffindors having said it. Harry put down his quill and looked at him properly, with the full attention he gave things that merited it. Thank you for saying that, he said. It takes something to come in here. Draco's jaw did the complicated thing again. I'm not saying I was wrong about everything. Pureblood families have. Draco, Harry's voice was patient and even. You can be from somewhere and still think about whether that place has it right. They're not the same thing. A long pause. My father wouldn't agree, Draco said. I know, but you're not your father. You're 11. You've got time to figure out your own positions. Another silence. The fire crackled. George Weasley was watching this with an expression of the most profound astonishment, like someone watching a lion lie down. Draco nodded stiffly, turned, and walked back out through the portrait hole with as much dignity as he could reassemble. The portrait swung shut. The common room erupted. What was that? Fred demanded. A person reconsidering a position, Harry said, picking up his quill. Malfoy, Ron said, pointing at the portrait hole. Draco Malfoy. Yes, reconsidering. He's not gone, Ron. He'll push back. He's been raised with this his whole life, but he came here, which means something moved. Harry went back to the essay. People who are completely fixed don't check whether they're right. Ron stared at the portrait hole. You're strange, he said finally, not unkindly. More like reporting a fact. Frequently, Harry agreed. Hermione, on the other side of the table, put down her charms notes and looked at Harry with an expression he was starting to recognize, the one where she was reassessing something. You weren't trying to befriend him, she said. On the train, you weren't trying to push him away either. You were just telling him the truth, Harry said. Most people don't do that. I know, most people find it uncomfortable, he shrugged. I don't. And it's more efficient. Hermione was quiet. Where did you grow up, she asked. Before Hogwarts. Gotham, Harry said. She nodded, processing. Is it? It's complicated, Harry said, with the slight warmth he reserved for things he was fond of. But it was good. The person who raised me is very good at cutting through noise to what matters. He paused, and there was something in the pause that Hermione, who noticed everything, caught and filed. I try to do the same thing. She went back to her notes. Then, I think it's working. Harry didn't answer, but the almost smile was there for a moment before he went back to the essay. And the common room settled back into the fire and the homework and the sound of people who were starting to know each other, which was, in the end, not very different from becoming a home. Halloween arrived with the weather in full theatrical mode, wind hammering the windows, candles guttering in the great hall despite being enchanted to resist it. The feast laid out with the seasonal excess that Hogwarts applied to every occasion as a matter of institutional principle. Harry was halfway through explaining to Ron why the theory behind Wingardium Leviosa suggested that a sufficiently skilled witch or wizard ought to be able to levitate themselves, which Ron was eating up, and Hermione was technically disagreeing with while clearly finding the line of reasoning interesting, when Professor Quirrell burst through the doors. He was terrified. Not performed terror, genuine, full-body fear, the kind that does something specific to a person's face and posture that you can't manufacture. Harry had studied fear responses with Bruce for exactly this reason, to be able to tell the real from the staged. Troll, Quirrell gasped, and his voice broke on the word. In the dungeons, I thought you should know. He collapsed against the doorframe in what looked like a faint. The Great Hall went from 400 people eating to 400 people panicking in approximately 2 seconds. Harry didn't panic. He stood up, watched the room, and did 3 things simultaneously. Located the exits, clocked which professors were moving where, and registered that Hermione had been in the bathroom off the Great Hall 20 minutes ago and had not come back. He turned to Ron. Hermione's not at the table. Ron's face went from panic to alarmed in a specific way that meant he'd understood immediately. She didn't know about the troll announcement. She was in the bathroom on the left side of the hall. They moved while the prefects were still trying to organize the evacuation, which meant they were moving against the crowd, which was uncomfortable but not difficult if you understood how crowd physics worked and where the gaps would be. Harry had located the troll before they found Hermione. He smelled it first, the specific damp earthendrot smell he'd read about in magical creatures, a defensive guide, and then heard it, the heavy irregular impacts of something very large moving in a confined space. He pushed Ron sideways into an alcove, held up one hand and listened, moving left, bathroom corridor. They found Hermione backed against the sinks with 12 feet of mountain troll between her and the door. She was rigid with a specific kind of terror that Harry recognized, the kind where your brain knows what it should be doing and your body has decided it's done. She'd clearly been trying to cast and nothing was coming. The Trolls Club came down and took out a sink. Harry was already moving. He wasn't running at the troll. He was running at the wall beside the door, which he hit and went up, not very high, 3 feet, just enough to get his hands on the door frame's upper edge, and swung himself sideways into the troll's peripheral vision. "Hey," he said. The troll turned, which put its back to the door. "Ron," Harry said from his position hanging from the doorframe, "get Hermione out, now." Ron moved. He had the good sense not to argue, which Harry noted and appreciated. He got Hermione by the arm and steered her toward the door while the troll was tracking Harry, who was doing the thing that worked on most large things with poor peripheral vision, moving constantly and unpredictably. He couldn't fight a mountain troll hand to hand. That would be stupid. But he could inconvenience one considerably. He dropped from the doorframe, hit the floor rolling, came up with his wand out, and spoke the incantation for Wingardium Leviosa with exactly the wrist motion Flitwick had taught them. The club went up. Not far, 8 feet, maybe 10, but far enough and fast enough that the troll, which had been mid-swing, lost its grip and grabbed for empty air. Then, because Harry was thinking about what Bruce had taught him about leverage and center of gravity and what happened when a large, heavy thing's balance was suddenly compromised, he turned the wand 2 degrees and let the club fall. It came down on the troll's own head. The troll sat down very hard. Then it lay down. Then it made no further contribution to the evening's events. McGonagall arrived 11 seconds later with Snape and Quirrell behind her. She took in the troll, the broken sinks, and 3 first-years, and her face went through several stages of response before settling on something that was professional control laid over genuine alarm. "What happened?" she asked, in the clipped voice of someone who wanted accurate information quickly. "Troll," Harry said, putting his wand away. "Hermione was in the bathroom when the announcement came. Ron and I came to find her. I used Wingardium Leviosa on the club." He paused. "It worked." McGonagall stared at him. "You cast a levitation charm on a mountain trolls club. It was the most efficient available option." A long silence. 10 points, she said finally, each for presence of mind. She sounded slightly like a woman arguing with herself. Harry noticed that she'd also glanced at Quirrell when she arrived, and that Quirrell had moved to the back of the group with a smoothness that was notable, given that he'd entered the room half unconscious with terror 20 minutes ago. Snape, who had said nothing, was watching Harry with an expression that was not readable in any normal register. Not hostile, not approving, just intensely, analytically focused in the way of a man adding data to a model. Harry met his gaze for a moment. Snape looked away first. Outside in the corridor, Hermione had her back against the wall and was breathing in deliberate, measured intervals, getting herself back. Ron was standing near her with the instinctive helpfulness of someone who didn't know what to say but wanted to be useful. Harry walked out and stood in front of her until she looked up. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady, mostly. "You'd have gotten there," Harry said. "You froze for a moment." "It happens. It can't happen again," she said, with a fierceness that wasn't at all fragile. "No," Harry agreed, "so we practice." She looked at him. "You're going to train me. I'm going to offer to Ron too if you want." He glanced at Ron, who had his hands in his pockets and was nodding before the sentence finished. "Practical defense," Hermione said. "Practical everything. The theory is good. The application under pressure is different. You need both." Hermione straightened. She was still pale, still coming down from the adrenaline, but the look in her eyes was the one Harry had seen in the bookshop, the hunger for information applied to a new category. "Yes," she said. "All right." Down the corridor behind the other professors, Quirrell was watching the 3 of them with an expression that lasted only a fraction of a second before being covered by the nervous, frightened mask. But Harry caught it. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. He filed that away with everything else and walked back toward the common room with his friends and began working on what he already knew about the 3rd-floor corridor. Chapter 3, The Smell of Fear. November came in cold and deliberate, like a debt being collected. The practice sessions started the Saturday after Halloween in an empty classroom on the 2nd floor that Harry had identified 3 weeks earlier as reliably unused between 9 and noon. He'd checked it 4 times at different hours before deciding. Ron had asked why they couldn't just use the common room, and Harry had explained that the common room had too many variables, too many people, too many conversations he couldn't monitor, too many ways for information to leave the room without permission. Ron had accepted this the way he accepted most things Harry explained, not blindly, but with the pragmatism of someone who could tell the difference between paranoia and operational awareness. Hermione had brought a reading list. "I've been thinking about what went wrong in the bathroom," she said, spreading 3 books on the desk with the efficiency of someone presenting a case. Theoretically, I know the defensive spells. The problem is retrieval under stress. My brain knew what to do and my hands didn't get the message. She tapped the first book, Fundamentals of Magical Response, a text that wasn't on any Hogwarts syllabus. There's research on stress inoculation. Repeated exposure to lower-stakes pressure situations that train the nervous system to stay functional during high-stakes ones. Harry looked at the book, then at her. Where did you find that? The restricted section. Ron looked up. The restricted section. I have good research instincts and Professor Flitwick signed a permission slip without reading the specific title. She said it without guilt, which Harry found privately excellent. The point is, I know the theory, I just need the practice to catch up. We start with the incantation under time pressure, Harry said. Not physical threat, just the clock. Most people practice spells at their own pace. You need to cast at someone else's pace. He paused. And you need to practice casting when you're off balance, physically. It changes how you hold your core, which changes your wand movement. Hermione was writing all of this down. How do you know that? Bruce trained me to do physical tasks under progressive physical disadvantage. The theory transfers. He looked at Ron. You're going to move around the room while she casts, not threateningly, just unpredictably. She needs to track a moving variable while maintaining focus. Ron rolled up his sleeves with the practical enthusiasm of someone who'd been given a job and intended to do it. I can do that. You're also going to be learning the same spell she is, both of you. Ron blinked. Me. You have good instincts, Harry said. On the train platform when your family came through the barrier, you were the first person to notice the woman in the green coat was watching the Muggle side too carefully. He'd observed that and not mentioned it until now. You read rooms, that's a skill, it needs a technical foundation. Ron stared at him. I didn't know you'd notice that. I notice most things, Harry said without making it sound like a boast, just a fact. It's not always comfortable for the people I'm around, I know that. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then he shrugged with the deliberate ease of someone who'd decided something. Fred and George noticed me noticing things years ago. Percy noticed I noticed things and told me I was being nosy. I know which one I'd rather be like. Harry nodded. Then he moved to the front of the classroom and pulled out his wand. We'll start with what you already know and I'll tell you where the gaps are. Lumos. Light bloomed at the tip. Hermione's was slightly brighter. Ron's was slightly bluer. Harry told them both this, along with what it meant about the way they were channeling energy through the incantation, and the session became something layered, part practice, part technical discussion, part something that wasn't quite any named thing but felt like people discovering what they were each for. 3 hours later, they were sweaty and slightly hoarse and considerably better than they'd started. They agreed on Saturdays and Wednesday evenings going forward. Walking back to the common room, Ron said, Where did he learn to do that? Do what? Hermione asked. Teach. He's 11 and he taught us like a... Ron gestured vaguely. Like someone who's been doing it a long time. Hermione considered. He was taught by someone very good, she said. And I think he pays attention to how he was taught as much as what he was taught. Ron nodded slowly. He sees the structure of things. Yes, Hermione sounded slightly wondering about it. Exactly that. Quidditch season opened the second Saturday of November under a sky the color of a bruise. The match was Gryffindor versus Slytherin, and the stands were packed with the specific energy of a rivalry that had decades of accumulated friction behind it. Harry sat on his Nimbus 2000 at the Gryffindor end of the pitch and watched the Slytherin team take their positions and thought about chess. Bruce had taught him chess at 6 and beaten him every game for 2 years. Then one evening Harry had simply stopped thinking about the pieces he had and started thinking about the pieces Bruce didn't have, and he'd won, and Bruce had looked at him with an expression Harry had needed some years to fully interpret. It was pride with an edge of something else. The something else was he's ready for the next level of problem. The Slytherin Seeker was a fifth-year named Marcus Bane, large and aggressive in the way of someone who decided size was the whole argument. He flew straight lines and fast dives, which meant he was a pure reactionary. He chased, he didn't anticipate. His weakness was commitment. Once he moved, he was committed. Harry filed this and waited. The snitch released at the opening whistle and disappeared in the gray sky, which was what snitches did. They had good instincts for finding neutral territory, not too high, not too low, not too obvious. Harry had read that experienced seekers developed their own snitch sense, an intuitive understanding of where the thing was likely to be. He understood the theory behind it. The snitch had a proximity instinct, a tendency to appear near the activity center of the match and then drift when approached too directly. It was essentially playing shy, so you didn't look for it directly. You expanded your awareness to the whole pitch and waited for something in your peripheral vision to catch and gleam. Harry had been doing this for 4 minutes when Bane suddenly dove toward the Gryffindor end, hard and fast and committed, and the crowd made the sound that meant the snitch had been spotted. Harry didn't move. He looked where Bane was going, identified the trajectory, tracked it backward, and looked 15 feet to the left of where Bane was pointing his broom. Bane was going for the feint of it, heading where the snitch had been half a second ago. But the snitch had changed direction the instant Bane committed, because that was what it did, and the thing it had changed toward, Harry, was already there. He'd moved before Bane finished his dive, cutting across the pitch at an angle that used the wind instead of fighting it, dropping 20 feet in a controlled fall that looked reckless and was actually precise. He came out of the drop with his right arm extended and felt the snitch hit his palm with the small frantic vibration of something caught, and pulled up smoothly and the whistle blew. 12 seconds. The fastest seeker catch in a Hogwarts opening match in 40 years, which Harry didn't know and wouldn't have found particularly relevant if he had. The stands erupted. He flew back to ground level and Gryffindor team hit him in a wave of red and gold and noise, and Oliver Wood was saying things that were technically words but had lost most of their coherence, and Ron was in the stands making a sound that was probably audible in Hogsmeade. In the Slytherin stands, Draco Malfoy stood with his arms crossed and watched. His expression was complicated, the expression of someone fighting two reactions at once. Part of him had expected Harry to be merely good, which would have been manageable. What he'd watched instead was something that didn't fit the frame he'd been handed. He uncrossed his arms, crossed them again. Across the pitch, Harry caught his eye for a moment, not triumphant, just present. Draco looked away first. Snape pulled Harry aside after potions on Monday. It wasn't aggressive, he held Harry back with a gesture and waited for the rest of the class to file out, and the absence of theater in it was more interesting than drama would have been. When the last student was gone, Snape set his marking aside and looked at Harry with the particular full attention he applied to problems he was taking seriously. "Your draft of Living Death," Snape said. "Was it wrong?" Harry asked. He'd followed the modifications he'd worked out from first principles. The clockwise-counterclockwise stir sequence had seemed redundant for the extract stage, and he'd adjusted accordingly. It was not wrong. Snape appeared to find this faintly irritating. It was functional at a level significantly beyond what this class requires. You made 3 modifications to the standard method. 2 of them were efficiency improvements. The third was a hypothesis about the wormhood interaction. I think the standard method over-extracts and you lose some of the... "I know what the standard method does," Snape said, with an edge that Harry registered but didn't react to. "Where did you learn the modifications?" "I worked them out," Harry said. "I read the theoretical basis for the potion first and then looked at the instructions and they didn't entirely match the theory, so I reconciled them." Snape was quiet for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes there and gone, the way things moved in deep water. "Who taught you to approach a practical subject through its theoretical basis first?" "Bruce," Harry said. "He says if you understand why something works, you know how to fix it when it breaks." "Bruce," Snape repeated. His voice was careful in a way that told Harry the name meant nothing to him, and he was noting the deliberate vagueness. "And your guardian considers that approach applicable to potion making. He considers it applicable to everything." Snape picked up a quill, set it down. "You will submit written documentation of your modifications and your reasoning. I will evaluate whether they are genuinely sound or merely functional by accident." Harry nodded. "Do not," Snape said, "interpret this as praise." "I didn't," Harry said. "And do not," Snape continued, with a quietness that was more pointed than volume would have been, "assume that doing things differently is the same as doing them better. It may be, it may not. Arrogance is the primary cause of catastrophic potion failure." "I'm not arrogant about it," Harry said. "I'm uncertain about the third modification. That's why I only tested it on the sample batch, not the main one." Another silence. Snape studied him with the expression of a man recalibrating something. "You ran a sample batch. In the dormitory, very small quantities. Alfred, the person who looks after me at home, he sent the right ingredients." "That is," Snape said carefully, "simultaneously inadvisable and methodologically sound." "I know. I'll use the lab rooms if that's preferable." "There are no student lab rooms." "I noticed the one on the lower level that doesn't appear to be in use on Wednesday mornings between 6 and 8, Harry said. "I wasn't sure of the protocol for requesting access." Snape blinked. "It was very small." "How did you find that room?" "I was mapping the castle." "You were mapping the castle," Harry confirmed. "It's not finished yet. The 7th floor keeps changing." Snape was quiet for what was, for Snape, a remarkably long time. Then, "Wednesday mornings, knock first." He picked up the quill again and opened his marking. "You are dismissed, Potter." Harry picked up his bag. At the door, Snape said without looking up, "The modification to the wormhood sequence is correct incidentally. I identified the same error 17 years ago and published a correction that nobody read." Harry turned. "What journal?" "Advances in Potions Theory, Volume 9. "I'll find it," Harry said. "I have no doubt," Snape said in a tone that remained officially neutral and carried, under that, a quality Harry had learned to recognize in Bruce when something exceeded expectation. He went to find the journal. He found more than the journals. He found it in the library, in a section Madame Pince guarded with the dedication of a man at a narrow pass, wedged between a 1974 edition of Transfiguration Today and a text on advanced arithmancy. Snape's paper was 17 pages, dense with notation, and the correction to the wormhood interaction was in footnote 6. Harry read it, made notes, read Snape's subsequent papers. There were 4 more, each drier and more technical than the last, each demonstrating a rigor that the man clearly hadn't applied to his teaching persona. He was reading the 3rd paper when he became aware of someone standing 2 shelves over. Not obviously. The library was occupied in the afternoons, scratch of quills, occasional whispered arguments, the ambient industry of 100 students doing homework they'd left too long. But this person wasn't doing homework. They were standing, and the quality of their stillness was a decision. Harry kept reading. He moved only his eyes. The person moved 1 shelf closer. Male, medium height, loose robes. The deliberateness of the approach had a method to it. Harry closed the journal, stood up, put it under his arm, and walked directly toward the figure. He nearly ran into a 4th-year Hufflepuff named Lewis who was, in fact, just looking for a book on herbology and startled badly at being walked toward with purpose. "Sorry," Harry said genuinely. "Thought you were someone else." Lewis retrieved his composure and his herbology book and left quickly. Harry stood for a moment and scanned the library. Nothing. Whoever it had been, if it had been anyone at all, was gone. He sat back down and wrote on a fresh page in his notebook, feeling of being watched 2nd time this week. First in the corridor outside Dada. Different person each time or same one. He thought for a moment, then wrote methodology. Batman uses criminals' fear of the dark. Someone is trying to use the same method on me. Watch pattern, establish counter-surveillance. He put the notebook away and went back to Snape's footnote. The Quidditch team's Wednesday practice was rained out, which meant Oliver called an indoor tactical session in the changing rooms, which meant Harry had 2 extra hours and put them toward the 3rd floor. Not going up. Not yet. He sat in the 2nd floor corridor and thought about architecture. Hogwarts was a castle built over 9 centuries by 4 founders who had, according to everything Harry had read, been extraordinarily paranoid people operating in a genuinely dangerous political environment. The castle's construction reflected this: hidden passages, redundant structures, rooms that appeared and disappeared, stairways that moved. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate layering, security through complexity, which meant the 3rd floor corridor was not just a corridor, it was a chosen location. Someone had decided that corridor was the right place to put something important. The question was, important to whom, since when, and why there? He thought about what Dumbledore had said at the opening feast. A painful death awaits, the theatrical quality of it. Bruce had a rule about theatrical warnings. They were never purely informational, they were strategic. Either they genuinely deterred by fear, or they created a specific behavior, a pull toward the thing in the subset of people fear didn't deter. And Dumbledore knew exactly who he was teaching. He knew what this school was full of: 11 to 17-year-olds sorted by disposition, a not insignificant number of whom were the type that theatrical danger warnings didn't deter. In fact, encouraged. Harry wrote, "Does Dumbledore want people to be curious about the corridor? If not, what other deterrent mechanism did he choose not to use? If yes, who specifically?" He stared at the question for a long time. Then he wrote one more line. What's he protecting and from whom, and is the thing he's protecting or the person he's protecting it from more dangerous? He put the notebook away, stood up, and went back to Gryffindor Tower, thinking hard. The owl from Alfred arrived on a Thursday in a package that also contained treacle tart, 3 books on advanced magical theory that Alfred had apparently sourced through a specialist dealer in Bath, and a note in Alfred's precise handwriting. "The books are from a dealer your father has been corresponding with for 3 years. She appears to be trustworthy, though she charges extortionately. The owl's name is apparently Archimedes. I did not name him. He named himself if his general demeanor is any guide. He has strong opinions about breakfast timing. Your father says, stay sharp, trust slowly, note everything. I say, eat the tart before Ron finds it. I have met Ron by correspondence and he has the energy of a person who eats other people's baked goods. All well here. The city misses you, I think, though that may be the city always being this dramatic. Yours, Alfred." Harry read it twice, ate approximately half the tart, put the rest on Ron's bedside table because Alfred's instruction had been read as an instruction rather than a warning, and opened the first of the new books. It was a text on magical cores, the theoretical basis for the inherent magical capacity a witch or wizard was born with, how it developed, how it interacted with external objects like wands. It was a graduate-level text, dense and precise, and Harry read it with the specific hunger he had for things that explained the mechanics of his own existence. By page 40, he'd found 3 things that applied directly to what he could do without a wand. By page 60, he'd formed a hypothesis about why the wandless work felt different from the wand-cast work. By page 90, he'd identified a question the text couldn't answer and written it in his notebook for later. Ron came back from the bathroom, found the tart, looked at Harry, looked back at the tart and said, "This feels like a trap." "Alfred made it, it's not a trap. Your butler made me a tart. He's better described as the person who runs everything," Harry said without looking up from the book. "But yes." Ron sat down, ate the tart with the reverence it deserved, and after a while said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes. The person who raised you, Bruce, is he?" Ron stopped and reorganized. "Fred and George bet on whether you're secretly royalty. George says you move like someone who grew up in a big house. Fred says you move like someone who grew up in a dangerous neighborhood. I think it might be both." Harry looked up from the book. "Both," he said. Ron nodded slowly, turning this over. "Is he good to you?" It was a simple question asked by someone who understood from personal experience that family could be good or not and that having it wasn't the same as having the good version of it. Harry understood the real question inside the surface one. "Yes," Harry said. "He's not easy, he doesn't do easy," but he thought about how to say it. "He never made me feel like a problem he was managing. He made me feel like a person he was paying attention to." Ron was quiet. Then, "That's the right thing, isn't it, the paying attention part?" "I think so." "My mum does that," Ron said. "Dad's better at the talking, but Mum, she watches. She knows what you need before you say it." He picked up a fork and took the last corner of the tart. "George says your house has a bat cave." Harry paused for exactly one beat. "George says a lot of things." "He does," Ron agreed cheerfully, "but he's usually right." Harry went back to his book and said nothing, which Ron correctly interpreted as neither confirmation nor denial, and which satisfied him in the way that actually interesting things satisfied people who were smart enough to know that a half answer was better than a lie. The second surveillance attempt happened on a Friday. Harry had been expecting it, not this week specifically, but the first time had established a pattern and patterns repeated. He'd altered his own schedule slightly, different route to the library, different timing for his solo work, enough variation to frustrate prediction without being so irregular as to attract attention. He was in the corridor near the defense classroom after everyone else had gone when he felt it, the specific quality of attention at his back, the weight of directed observation. He kept walking, noted a shadow in a doorway 30 feet ahead, counted steps, and at the 22nd step turned left into a side passage that looped back, moved fast and quiet through 2 more corridors and came out behind the doorway. Nobody there, but the doorway smelled of garlic. Harry stood in the empty corridor and looked at the space where someone had been and thought about what Quirrell would want from following him. Information, location tracking. Or just knowing what Harry knew, what he was curious about, what he might be investigating. He wrote in his notebook that evening, "QP following me personally. Not just aware of me, actively tracking. Why now? Has my behavior changed? Yes, practice sessions, library research, corridor mapping. Which of these is relevant to him?" He sat back and thought. The 3rd floor, he's trying to find out how much I know about the 3rd floor. He looked at that sentence for a long time. Then he smiled just slightly with the particular satisfaction of a pattern resolving into coherence. Which means there's something on the 3rd floor that Quirrell either wants or wants to prevent someone else from getting. He wrote, "Communicate with D indirect. He needs to think I know less than I do. Then, also need to know what's actually up there." The someone who knew about the 3rd floor, it turned out, was Neville Longbottom. Harry had not planned this. He'd been watching Neville for weeks, not with suspicion, but with the interest he had for people who were more than they appeared, and Neville Longbottom was definitely that. He was quiet and frequently alarmed, and had a genuine gift for herbology that he talked about with a specificity and passion that was entirely different from his performance in every other class. He also noticed things, in the gentle, observational way of someone who'd learned to be careful by learning to read rooms first. Harry sat next to him at dinner on a Tuesday in mid-November and said, "Your Gran was close to the Longbottom family's relationship with the ministry, wasn't she?" Neville blinked. She talks about it. Why? I've been reading the history of Hogwarts governance. There are references to an arrangement between certain old families and the school that isn't fully documented. I was wondering if the Longbottoms were one of them." Neville looked briefly panicked, which was his default reaction, but then his expression shifted to the engaged look that appeared whenever someone treated him like someone worth asking. "Gran knows about that. It's old stuff from before the statute. Some of the founding families had rights to certain areas of the school." He paused, like custody rights for things they'd placed in the castle. Harry was very still. Things they'd placed. "Valuables," Neville said, and now he was looking slightly alarmed again, like he'd said too much. "Gran talks about it like it's history, ancient history. I don't know what's still." He stopped. "You don't have to know anything," Harry said easily. "I'm just interested in the history." He turned the conversation to herbology, which Neville fell into with grateful relief, and spent 20 minutes asking genuine questions about magical plant biology that Neville answered with more confidence and precision than he showed in any classroom. Walking back to the common room, Harry turned what Neville had said over. Things they'd placed in the castle. Dumbledore hadn't put whatever was on the third floor there arbitrarily. It had been moved there, hidden there. Protected there, something valuable enough to require a troll, if he believed the rumors Hagrid had been carefully not confirming. Something somebody outside the castle wanted. Something Quirrell was either trying to get or trying to understand how close Harry was to getting. He sat down in the common room, opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote at the top, "The Philosopher's Stone." He'd been reading about Nicholas Flamel since the conversation in the bookshop with Hermione. He'd been reading about immortality, about the dark arts' relationship with the concept, about what a man like Voldemort might want above all else. He'd built the case over 3 months of collected information, and now it clicked closed like a mechanism engaging. He sat with it for 5 minutes, making sure the logic held. Then he went to find Hermione. She was in the common room armchair she'd claimed with the specificity of a cat, third from the fire on the left, surrounded by books and making marks in a notebook with 2 different colored quills. He sat down across from her and said quietly, "The Philosopher's Stone." She went very still, her hand stopped moving, she looked up at him. "Flamel." "Yes. I've been thinking about Flamel since the bookshop," she said, voice low. "I didn't want to say it yet because I didn't have enough to." "You did have enough, you were being careful." Her chin came up slightly at that, not defensiveness, more the acknowledgement of someone who'd been seen accurately. "It's in the castle," she said. "Third floor and Quirrell wants it, possibly for Voldemort." She didn't flinch at the name, which Harry noted with approval. Most people flinched. "How long have you known about Quirrell?" "First night at the feast. I've been building the case since." Hermione looked at him for a moment. "And you didn't tell me immediately because—" "I didn't have enough to tell. That wasn't just suspicion. Now I have a structure." He paused. "I'm telling you now." "What about Ron?" "I'll tell Ron tonight. He'll want to be included, and he should be. He's useful in ways neither of us are." At her slight expression, "He reads people. He reads rooms socially in ways that our approach doesn't cover." "We need that." Hermione considered this. "You've been thinking about our respective capabilities." "I've been thinking about the problem and what solving it requires," Harry said. "You 3 are part of what solving it requires." Something moved in her face. Not quite sentiment. Hermione was too careful for easy sentiment, but something adjacent to it, the quality of someone absorbing a thing that meant more than they were going to admit immediately. "What do we do?" "For now," Harry said, "we find out exactly what's protecting it, and we watch Quirrell watch me and let him think I'm less close than I am." Hermione's eyes went sharp. "You're going to use his surveillance against him. Information flow is a weapon. He's trying to gather information about me. I'm going to make sure what he gathers is what I want him to have." She was quiet for a moment, then with the specific tone of someone recalibrating an assessment upward, "Harry, yes, I want you to know that I came to Hogwarts expecting to be the most prepared person in my year." "You are," he said, "in most categories." She looked at him. He looked back, entirely genuine. "That's somehow both reassuring and annoying," she said. "Alfred says I have that quality sometimes." "Alfred sounds very wise." "He is," Harry said. "I'll introduce you sometime." Ron took the information about the stone and Quirrell the way he took most serious information, with an initial silence in which he processed it, followed by a question that targeted the practical problem. "So what do we do about Quirrell right now?" Ron said. "While you're building the case and mapping the defenses and all that, what stops him from just going for it?" "He doesn't have all the information he needs," Harry said. "Whatever's protecting the stone has multiple layers. He's still working out what they are." "How do you know that?" "Because if he had what he needed he'd have moved. He hasn't." Harry paused. "He's also afraid, genuine fear, not the performed kind. Whatever's on the third floor, some of it is beyond him." "What isn't beyond him?" Ron asked. It was the right question, and Harry looked at him for a moment with the expression he got when Ron did this. "Exactly," he said. "That's what we need to know." Ron leaned back in his chair. "My dad works at the ministry. He's mentioned the stone before, Flamel specifically, not the stone directly but research into alchemical objects. He said the ministry was worried about it 2 years ago. Someone tried to steal it from Gringotts." Harry went very still. "From Gringotts?" "Yeah, Dad said it was one of the most secure vaults. Whoever tried it got nothing. The vault was emptied the same day," he said. "He didn't know by whom." Dumbledore, Harry thought. Dumbledore moved it the same day, which meant Dumbledore had known the attempt was coming, which meant he had intelligence on Voldemort's movements, which meant he'd moved the stone to Hogwarts not because it was the safest place by objective measure but because he'd wanted it near him, or near Harry. He wrote 3 things in his notebook, tore out the page, folded it, put it in his pocket. "What's that?" Ron asked. "Questions I need to ask someone," Harry said. "Dumbledore." "Not yet." Harry looked at the fire. "Hagrid first." He's got more information than he thinks he has, and he's better to talk to than Dumbledore because he doesn't manage what he tells you. Hermione looked up from her notes. That's a very specific distinction to make about someone. Dumbledore chooses information strategically, Harry said. I don't have anything against it, it's good strategy, but I want data before I want strategy. Hagrid gives data. Ron grinned. You're going to get Hagrid to talk about the third floor. I'm going to have tea with Hagrid and listen to what he says when he talks about everything else, Harry said. It's different. Ron pointed at him. That's exactly what Fred does to get information out of Mum. Tell Fred he has good instincts. He already knows. It's a problem. Hagrid's hut on a November evening was warm in the specific way of a place that had been made comfortable by someone who genuinely cared about comfort without thinking too hard about aesthetics. The fire was enormous, the tea was strong, and the rock cakes were exactly as geological as advertised, which Harry ate one of with equanimity because Alfred had taught him that accepting food someone offered was a form of respect that paid for itself. Great tur have ye, Hagrid said for the second time with the warmth of a man who'd been afraid Harry wouldn't come. Harry had come 3 times now, and each time Hagrid had expressed the same surprised pleasure, which said something about what he was used to. How's the training going? Oliver Wood says you're the best seeker Gryffindor's had in. I had a question about dragons, Harry said. Hagrid's face lit up with the specific illumination of a man whose favorite subject has been raised. He launched into dragons, Norwegian Ridgebacks specifically, which was interesting given that Harry had asked generally, with the passionate digressive energy of a genuine enthusiast. Harry listened, asked follow-up questions, steered gently, and within 20 minutes had learned 3 things. 1. Hagrid had recently acquired a dragon's egg which he was keeping secret from almost everyone. 2. Hagrid had, in a moment of enthusiastic tangent, mentioned that the thing on the 3rd floor wouldn't fright any dragon at any rate. Fluffy doesn't bother a thing used to real fire. Fluffy, Harry noted. Alive, probably large, given that it needs a full corridor. Hagrid raised it, 3 heads. 3. Hagrid had then covered his mouth and looked guilty, which Harry responded to by smoothly redirecting the conversation to Norwegian Ridgeback feeding habits, letting the slip settle into the past like it hadn't happened. Walking back to the castle in the dark, his breath showing in the cold air, Harry thought about a 3-headed dog and what it took to get past one. He'd read about Cerberus in the Greek myths at age 7. The solution, if mythology was reliable, was music. He thought about the layers underneath that. Dumbledore hadn't just used a dog. Multiple layers, each one a different type of problem, designed to require different skills to pass. The dog was the first layer, and it was the brute force layer, something huge and straightforward, probably the hardest thing to get past physically. He thought about what came after. He went back to the castle, sat in the empty Wednesday morning lab room at 6 in the morning and wrote to Bruce. Not the encrypted pen, a longer letter in the code they'd agreed on at the start of term, delivered by Archimedes, who had taken to Harry with a strong and particular bond that Archimedes made clear was his own decision rather than the result of any effort on Harry's part. There's a situation developing here that needs external documentation. He wrote it out, everything about Quirrell the Stone, his assessment of Voldemort's diminished state and potential for recovery. He was careful and thorough. Then, at the end, he wrote, I'm not planning to wait for this to become a crisis. He sealed it and sent Archimedes out the window into the gray December light. The response came 4 days later and was 2 words, I know, followed on a second line by I'm watching, continue, don't do it alone. And below that, in Alfred's handwriting which had appeared without explanation, eat breakfast properly. I can tell when you're skipping it. I cannot explain how I can tell this, but I can. Harry folded the letter and put it in his breast pocket. He stood in the lab room and thought about what came next, not in a broad sense but specifically. The sequence of steps required, the information still needed, the gaps. He put on his jacket, picked up his bag and went to breakfast. The castle was waking up around him, noise filtering down from the upper floors, the smell of food arriving from the kitchens. Outside the windows the grounds were sharp with frost, the forbidden forest dark on the horizon. Somewhere up on the 3rd floor something with 3 heads moved in the dark and didn't know what was coming. Harry got a full breakfast because Alfred had a point and began to plan. Chapter 4, 13 Ways to Break a Trap. December arrived the way Gotham winters arrived. Without ceremony, just a drop in temperature that made everything sharper and less forgiving. Harry had 13 entries in his notebook under the heading 3rd Floor Defense Structure, estimated. He'd built the list over 6 weeks from fragments, Hagrid's slip about Fluffy, Hermione's research into historical Hogwarts security arrangements. Ron's offhand comment about his father mentioning the stone had been protected by some of the finest magical minds in Britain, and 3 separate late-night conversations with nearly headless Nick, who turned out, if approached with genuine curiosity rather than ghost tourism enthusiasm. To have an excellent memory for castle modifications across several centuries. The list looked like this: 1. Three-headed dog, corridor entrance. Weakness, music mythological precedent cross-referenced with Hagrid's knowledge base, he knows this. Trapdoor underneath, 213, unknown, assumptions, each layer requires different skill set. Dumbledore designed this for adults. Minimum 6 layers based on staff capability assessment. He'd been mapping the staff, not obviously over dinner conversations and class observations, watching who went where on which evenings. Professor Sprout went to the greenhouses on Tuesday and Thursday nights. Professor Flitwick carried sheet music in his bag every Friday. McGonagall played a strategy game in her office on Monday evenings. He'd heard the chess clock from the corridor. Quirrell went to the 3rd floor on alternating Wednesdays at midnight, which Harry had established by the simple method of being somewhere he could observe the staircase from a position Quirrell couldn't observe him. He'd gone 3 times. Each time Quirrell had come back down within 40 minutes, which meant he was being stopped. The question was where. He's being stopped at the same point each time, Harry told Ron and Hermione on a Saturday practice session in mid-December. The classroom had become theirs in the way that spaces became yours through repeated use, particular chairs, a particular arrangement of desks. The window they'd agreed was better left open despite the cold because the fresh air kept them sharp. 40 minutes isn't enough to get through more than 1 or 2 layers. What stops him at the first one? Hermione asked. She was rotating her wand through the new grip sequence they'd been developing, a modification to the standard dueling hold that distributed the control across 4 fingers rather than 3, which they'd worked out gave better directional precision at the cost of raw force, which was a trade-off Harry had decided was worth it for their current skill level. The dog, Ron said immediately. He's never passed the dog. He'd need the music and he'd need to know about the music, and that's Hagrid's information, and Hagrid wouldn't, Ron stopped. Actually, would Hagrid? He let the dragon thing slip to Harry. Hagrid is generous, Harry said, and he likes people who seem genuinely interested. Quirrell could have worked it out of him. He paused, but I don't think he has. The timing is wrong. Quirrell's been doing 40-minute runs since October. If he'd gotten past the dog, the timeline would have changed. So he's stuck at the first layer, Hermione said, or he's past the first layer and stuck at the second, and he's using the 40 minutes to probe the second. Harry drew a line in his notebook. I need to know what the second layer is. Hermione was quiet for a moment. She had the look she got when she was deciding whether to say something she'd already decided to say. I found something in the library. When? 2 weeks ago. I wanted to verify it before mentioning it. She pulled a folded piece of parchment from her bag, dense with her small, precise handwriting, and smoothed it on the desk. Professor Sprout introduced a new plant to Greenhouse 3 in September. The same week the stone was moved here. Devil's Snare, not unusual in itself, but the quantity was significant, far more than would be needed for teaching purposes, and she requested special soil from the lower-level storage rooms. Specific rooms. She let that sit. Harry looked at the parchment. The rooms, he said, that connect to the 3rd-floor structure. I can't confirm that directly. But the access logs which Madame Pince keeps and which I was able to look at during a moment when her attention was elsewhere show Sprout accessing those rooms twice in September. Ron was staring at her. You looked at restricted access logs. I looked at records that were left unattended in an unlocked room, Hermione said with the specific careful precision of someone who'd thought about this distinction. Which is different. Is it? Meaningfully, yes. Harry looked at the parchment and made a note. Devil's Snare is the second layer, Sprout's contribution. He looked up. It's a plant that responds to heat and light. Panic makes it worse, it tightens when its prey struggles. Calm and controlled response gets you through. He paused, which means it's designed to stop people who react with instinct over reason. And layer 3? Hermione asked. Working on it, he looked at her. Good work. She picked up the parchment and refolded it with the slight additional energy of someone who was pleased and managing it with dignity. The staff Quidditch match happened on the 14th of December, which was technically not a thing. There was no official staff Quidditch match. But Oliver Wood had discovered that several professors played in a casual pickup game on the last Saturday before holidays, and Oliver had spent 3 days asking Harry for confirmation of a rumor that Flitwick had been a professional chaser before moving into academia. Harry confirmed it on Wednesday because he'd known since the second week of term. The pickup game meant the Quidditch pitch was occupied and Gryffindor's scheduled practice was moved, which gave Harry 3 hours of prime afternoon time with no scheduled obligations. He spent one of them with Ron and Hermione doing spell work. He spent the second one at Hagrid's, which was planned. Hagrid had a fire going against the December cold and a kettle on and the expression of a man who'd been thinking about something and was glad for the company. The dragon egg hatched, he said, within 2 minutes because Hagrid had the inability to not tell people things he was excited about, which was one of the things Harry genuinely liked about him. What kind? Harry asked. Norwegian Ridgeback called him Norbert. Hagrid's face was doing something between sheepish and absolutely delighted. He's very small. Hagrid, Harry leaned forward slightly. You know you can't keep a dragon in a wooden house. I know, I'm not saying it to tell you off, I'm saying it because there are exactly 2 ways this ends and one of them is considerably worse than the other. He paused. I can help you get him somewhere safer, I know people who know people. Hagrid looked at him with the complicated look of a man receiving help he needed from a source he hadn't expected. You do? Yes, but it needs to happen soon. Harry held his gaze. A month, maybe less. Hagrid nodded slowly, and there was a moment between them that was quiet and genuine, the moment of 2 people who trusted each other enough to have a real conversation. Harry used it. Can I ask you something about Fluffy? Hagrid's face went carefully blank in the way of someone who'd been told not to say something and was trying to remember they'd been told. I don't. You mentioned Fluffy a few weeks ago by accident, Harry said, not unkindly. I'm not trying to get past him, I'm trying to understand whether Fluffy is secure, whether whoever is trying to get to what's below him is close to getting past him. Hagrid stared at him. What do you know about what's below him? Enough to be concerned, Harry said, and I'd rather be concerned with accurate information than concerned with guesses. A long pause, the fire crackled. Norbert made a sound from under the floorboards that Harry decided not to acknowledge. He's very secure, Hagrid said finally. Anyone who got past him would have turned know his weakness and only I know that and I'd never, he stopped, look stricken. Well, I told you, didn't I, the music thing? You didn't tell me specifically, Harry said. I made an inference from mythology. Right, Hagrid's shoulders dropped. Right, but the things below Fluffy, Harry, those aren't for first years. They're not for most adults, to be honest. Dumbledore set them up himself. Not entirely himself, Harry said. The plant is sprouts. He stopped because Hagrid's face had told him something. The way the eyes went slightly sideways, the small flinch. How much do you know? Hagrid asked. Less than I'm going to, Harry said honestly, but more each day. Hagrid looked at him for a long time with the expression of a man in the middle of 2 obligations. His promise to Dumbledore and his care for the boy in front of him, who he'd carried out of a burning house when he was an infant and who looked at him across a firelit table like someone who would find the truth one way or another and might as well find it with help. There's a trapdoor, Hagrid said, below Fluffy, and below the trapdoor there's, he stopped. I really shouldn't. I know, Harry said, you're doing fine. It was the right thing to say. Hagrid looked slightly less torn. What I'll tell ya is that there are things in there that need more than magic to get through, and that Dumbledore's not worried about the obvious people getting past them. He met Harry's eyes. He's worried about someone who's already inside. Harry went still. Inside the castle. Inside the protections. Someone who already knows some of what's in there because they helped put it there. Hagrid looked at the fire. I've said enough. I've said too much. You've said exactly the right amount, Harry said and meant it and made a note mentally as soon as his hands were free. He walked back to the castle in the cold afternoon with his breath visible and his mind running fast. Someone who's already inside, not just Quirrell knowing the defenses because he'd probed them. Quirrell knowing some of them because he'd helped design them. Which meant Quirrell had been trusted when the protections were set up. Which meant Voldemort had gotten inside someone close to Dumbledore before anyone had caught it. He stopped walking for a moment, standing in the frost-hardened grass and let that fully arrive. Dumbledore knew, or suspected. That was why the theatrical warning at the feast, not to keep students out but to create a visible security perimeter that would tell him if someone inside was testing it. The corridor was a trap and the stone was bait and Quirrell was the person Dumbledore was watching walk toward it. The question was what Dumbledore planned to do when Quirrell reached the end. And the question underneath that was whether Dumbledore's plan accounted for Harry. He started walking again. Faster this time. He wrote to Bruce that evening with the full updated picture. He sent it via Archimedes with a note that said urgent and left the window cracked for a return. The reply came in 6 hours, which meant Bruce had been awake. He was often awake. Your assessment is sound. The trap within a trap structure is consistent with how Dumbledore operates based on the history I have. Question, does he know you know? Harry replied, number I've been managing what Quirrell sees. Dumbledore doesn't appear to be watching me closely. I think he's focused on Quirrell. But I can't be certain. Never be certain about a man who's been playing this game for 100 years. He may be letting you think he's not watching. Harry smiled at that, alone in the dormitory, everyone else at dinner. Agreed, working assumption, he knows I'm curious. Doesn't know how much. Good. Keep it that way, a pause indicated by the delay in the return message. What's your plan? Harry looked at his notebook, at the 13 entries, at the gaps between them, get the complete picture on the defenses. Then put myself between Quirrell and the stone before Dumbledore's timeline runs out. He's waiting for Quirrell to tip his hand. Quirrell's close. I think the move comes before the end of term. The reply took longer than usual. When it came, it was careful. I've been in contact with Dumbledore. Independently, Harry sat back. He reached out 2 weeks ago. He knows more than you've been letting him see. He's not alarmed. I'll tell you his exact words. Your son is developing into a very specific kind of problem, which I mean in the best possible way. He wanted me to know you were safe. He also wanted to know how much I knew. Harry typed back. Yes, and I told him less than I have. Don't be annoyed, I'm protecting your information advantage. I'm not annoyed. A pause. Did he say anything about his plan? He said the stone is bait, his words. He said, I expect the trap to close before the school year ends. He's planning to be there. He's planning for various contingencies, Bruce wrote. I got the impression he's also planning for contingencies that involve you, whether or not he's told you about them. Harry, yes, if Voldemort is at the end of that corridor, you understand what you're walking toward. Harry looked at the wall of the dormitory for a moment. The stone was old and cold and entirely unimpressed by the question. I understand what I'm walking toward better than anyone else in this building, he wrote back, because I know who he is and what he wants and how fear works and how it fails. I'm not afraid of him. I know you're not a beat. That's both the thing that makes you capable of this and the thing that keeps me awake. Alfred says you're always awake. Alfred is a traitor. Go to sleep. Real sleep, I'll eat breakfast. That's not what I said. Harry closed the pen and lay back on his bed with his hands behind his head and stared at the canopy and thought about what trap within a trap meant when you were the person meant to spring it, and what it meant to be a contingency in someone else's plan, and what it meant to decide to stop being a contingency and become a variable. He thought about it for 20 minutes. Then he went asleep, because Bruce was right about sleep, and Alfred had also said this. And two people that competent agreeing on something was statistically significant. The Quidditch match against Hufflepuff was the Saturday before the holiday break, and Draco Malfoy showed up in the stands wearing Slytherin green with the studied casualness of someone who'd thought about where to sit and sat somewhere conspicuous. Harry noticed him from 50 feet up and said nothing, because the match required full attention and Draco Malfoy sitting in a stand didn't rank in the current priority hierarchy. The match was going well. Hufflepuff had a good keeper, and a seeker with a broom that was technically better than Harry's, but flown with noticeably less imagination. Harry had been doing what he always did, expanding his awareness across the whole pitch, tracking multiple things simultaneously, waiting for the snitch to reveal itself in the peripheral field where it couldn't help itself. He'd found it at the 12-minute mark, hovering near the Hufflepuff goalposts, doing the thing where it held very still against a background that almost matched its color. He could have gone for it then. He had the angle and the speed. Instead, he held position and watched the Hufflepuff seeker. The seeker hadn't seen it yet. Harry waited. At 15 minutes, the Hufflepuff seeker suddenly jerked, spotted it, started moving. Harry moved at the same moment, not toward the snitch, but on a trajectory that would cut the seeker's approach angle, forcing him to choose between his line to the snitch and a collision course with Harry. The seeker chose the collision avoidance. Harry took the snitch on a clean line with his right hand, level flight, no theatrics. The Gryffindor stands went up. Harry turned his broom and flew back toward the center of the pitch and was almost there when he felt it. A wrongness, the kind that preceded physical danger, a quality of the air changing that he associated with the drills Bruce had run for exactly this. Learn to feel the room before you see the threat. His broom lurched. Not turbulence, not wind, it had been calm all match. The broom jerked underneath him with a specific violence, the kind of thing that had intention behind it. He clamped his thighs around the handle and leaned forward and felt it happen again, the broom trying to throw him in short, savage bucks, left, right, left, systematic rather than chaotic. Someone was jinxing his broom. The thought arrived calm and immediate. He didn't panic. Panic was counterproductive when you were 40 feet up on a possessed broom. He kept his weight central, kept his grip, and did what Bruce had taught him about keeping functional under duress. Assess first, act second, skip the emotional middle step. He scanned the stands. His eyes needed half a second to find what he was looking for, a fixed point in a moving crowd. Someone not watching the broom spectacle but watching something else, maintaining eye contact with their own work. Quirrell. In the staff section, eyes fixed on Harry, lips moving. Harry committed the sight line to memory, held on through another 2 lurches, and spotted Hermione in the Gryffindor section below, already moving. She'd seen something, or guessed, or done the calculation. She was pushing through the crowd toward the staff section, and she had her wand out, and Harry had approximately 4 seconds before Quirrell noticed her approaching, which meant the jinx was about to end either through Hermione's intervention or Quirrell breaking it voluntarily. He didn't wait to find out which. He pointed the broom down in a controlled dive toward the pitch, not falling, choosing the fall, and pulled up 20 feet from the ground and landed with both feet and stepped off the broom like a man stepping off a moving walkway, completely deliberate. The stands went very quiet, then very loud. Ron was there in seconds, face white under the freckles. "Are you hurt?" "Number, it was a jinx." Harry kept his voice quiet under the noise. "Quirrell," Ron's jaw went hard. "Quirrell jinxed you. I saw him. Hermione saw it too." She broke his concentration. Harry scanned the staff section. "Quirrell was gone. Don't say anything publicly, not yet." "Harry, it's information. Knowing that we know he's willing to do this openly is useful." He picked up the broom, examined it, found nothing permanently wrong. "He's escalating. He's getting closer to the stone and he's starting to worry about interference." Ron stared at him. "He tried to kill you and you're calling it information." "He tried to eliminate a potential obstacle," Harry said. "Which is actually good news. It means he thinks I'm significant enough to be worth eliminating, which means his intelligence on me is better than I thought." "That is," Ron said with feeling, "the most Batman way to respond to nearly dying I have ever heard." Harry looked at him. "Did you just say Batman?" Ron's ears went red. "You told me about him." "I mentioned Bruce once." Fred Googled it. Ron's ears got redder. "On Hermione's laptop during the holidays." "We wanted to understand where you came from." "I'm sorry, I know it's fine," Harry said, and he meant it. "What did you find?" "Loads of newspaper articles about Bruce Wayne that all said he was a very boring billionaire who liked parties." Ron paused. "Fred said they were clearly written by someone who'd never looked at the man properly." "Fred's perceptive." "He is. I'm still sorry." Harry stood on the Quidditch pitch in the December cold with his possibly jinxed broom and looked at his friend and thought about what Alfred had said about letting people in. That the thing Bruce and Harry both did, the cataloging and the assessment and the watching before the trusting, was good practice, and also, if applied without limit, became a kind of solitary confinement that nobody outside the field needed to be in. "Bruce raises money for children's hospitals," Harry said, "and he once spent 17 hours in a burning building to recover evidence for a case that would have been dismissed without it, and he taught me everything that just kept me on that broom." He paused. "The newspapers miss most of it." Ron nodded. That was all. Just nodded, like Harry had confirmed something he'd already decided. Hermione arrived, slightly breathless, her hair wild from pushing through a crowd. "He moved," she said immediately, "before I could get a clear angle, but I did get close enough to see his face," and she stopped. "Harry, he knew what I was doing. He looked at me before he moved. He knew I was there to break the eye contact." "Which means he's been watching us," Harry said, "all three of us." "How long?" "Long enough to know the three of us work together, long enough to factor us into his threat assessment." Harry looked at the empty staff section. "He's scared. Quirrell's scared of us." Hermione looked at that for a moment. "That's both reassuring and dangerous," Harry said. "Scared people with nothing to lose make unpredictable moves." "He's going to try for the stone before the end of term. I can feel the timeline compressing." He looked at them both. "We need to know the full defense structure, all of it, before he gets through it." "How?" Hermione asked. Harry thought, "There are 5 people whose magic I can identify in the defense layers based on capability assessment. Sprout the Devil's Snare. Flitwick's almost certainly enchanted keys or a similar challenge. He's the charms expert. McGonagall would have done transfiguration, something complex and game-based." He paused. "Quirrell would have contributed one, which is now a complication because he knows his own layer, and Dumbledore." "What did Dumbledore contribute?" Ron asked. "The mirror," Harry said. "It has to be. He said once that Hogwarts hid things inside things, something that gives you what you want without giving you what you want. That's how Dumbledore thinks in paradoxes." Hermione was nodding slowly. "The Mirror of Erised. You know it? I read about it. It shows you your deepest desire, which makes it useful as a protection mechanism if the thing being protected can only be extracted by someone who doesn't want it." "Someone who wants to find it," Harry said, "not to use it. Someone with a specific quality of intent." He paused. "Which is specifically designed for whoever Dumbledore was thinking of when he designed this." He left that sitting. Ron said quietly, "He was thinking of you." Harry didn't answer immediately. He looked across the empty pitch at the castle rising gray and solid against the winter sky. "Was thinking of someone like me," he said carefully. "But the mirror doesn't know who I am. It responds to intent, which means it responds to whoever stands in front of it with the right intent." "And Quirrell can't have the right intent," Hermione said. "Quirrell wants to use it. Whatever the stone can do, the elixir of life, immortality for Voldemort, that's what Quirrell wants it for. The mirror won't give him that. But it might tell him enough to figure out how to get it," Ron said. "If he gets that far..." "Yes," Harry looked at them both, "so we don't let him get that far." The plan took shape over the next 4 days, worked out in the empty classroom in the cold early mornings and the quiet late evenings, all 3 of them contributing something the others couldn't. Hermione built the defensive map, working from her library research and cross-referencing everything they'd gathered into a complete sequence. 7 layers, she concluded, each one assigned to a different professor. The unknown one she placed at position 6, between a logic puzzle she'd found historical reference to and the mirror. Ron thought about chess, which turned out to be essential when Harry described what he'd inferred about McGonagall's lair. Giant chess pieces, Ron said. It has to be. McGonagall uses chess as her strategic thinking exercise. She's been playing that game in her office every Monday for 3 years according to Nick. She'd set up a chess challenge because it's how she thinks about strategy. He paused. Which means whoever plays through it needs to know chess, really know it. He said it without any evident modesty, which Harry found bracing. Ron was not good at modesty about things he was genuinely excellent at. That's you, Harry said. Yeah. Ron squared his shoulders in a way that was quiet and completely sure. That's me. Harry looked at him. You know that in a real game scenario if the pieces are life-sized. I know, Ron met his gaze. I've been thinking about it, playing it through in my head. He picked up a chess piece, the small set he'd brought down from the dormitory, and turned it in his hands. There's a queen sacrifice that ends a game like this in 7 moves. It requires giving up the queen, and if the pieces are life-sized, you'd be the queen, Hermione said softly. Yeah, Ron set the piece down. But you can't win a complex endgame without it. If we're going down there, I'm not letting you, Hermione began. Hermione. Ron's voice was patient and entirely calm. I'm not asking for permission, I'm telling you the strategy, there's a difference. She looked at him. He looked back with the warm, steady confidence of someone who'd grown up the 6th of 7 children and had learned that being underestimated was the normal condition and that it didn't change what you were capable of. She closed her mouth, nodded once. The 4th layer, Harry said, moving them forward because the moment had the fragile quality of something that needed to land and then move on. I've been thinking about the enchanted keys Flitwick would set up. If he's used charms, it'll be motion-based, flying keys, the right one among hundreds. Pattern differentiated. The right key will have something specific that makes it distinguishable from the wrong ones. How do we find it? Hermione asked. The right key won't be trying to escape, Harry said. Flitwick thinks about things from both sides. He said so in one of his papers. If you enchant a key to be found by someone good enough, you make it findable, just not obviously. The right key will have a flaw or an inconsistency that rewards examination. Hermione nodded, making notes. The logic puzzle layer, Harry said. That's yours. She looked up. How do you know it's a logic puzzle? Because Snape designed one of the layers, and the only person in this school who knows both potions and logical reasoning at that depth is, actually there are 2, you and Snape. He paused. And it won't be potions. He doesn't do the obvious. It'll be something that tests whether the person can reason under pressure. Poisons and potions as the mechanism, but logic as the key. Hermione looked at him. You think he did it on purpose, made it solvable for someone like me? I think Snape respects a specific kind of intelligence and built the challenge for that kind of intelligence. Harry paused. He published a paper on logical structure in potion brewing 17 years ago that nobody read. He's been waiting for someone to read it. I'll read it tonight, Hermione said immediately. I know, Harry said. I left it on your bed this morning. She stopped, stared at him. Snape gave me the access to the lab room. The journal volume was there. He shrugged. It seemed relevant. She picked up her quill, put it down, picked it up again. Harry, yes, sometimes you're very thoughtful and it's difficult to respond to. Alfred says the same thing. Alfred sounds like someone I should meet. I'm planning on it, Harry said and went back to the map. The encrypted pen clicked on a Wednesday morning 313 and Harry was already awake. League activity near Hogwarts, Bruce had written. Scouts, not an assault team. They're watching the castle. Same interest as October 1981. Harry sat up in the dark dormitory. Connected to Quirrell or independent? Independent for now, but that changes if Quirrell succeeds. If Voldemort reconstitutes through the stone, the League will move to leverage him. They've tried before. How close are they? Close enough that I've repositioned assets. I have eyes on the north approach. A pause. Harry, I'm telling you this because you need the full picture, not because I want you to feel like you have backup. There's a difference? Yes, backup means you wait for it. Full picture means you act with accurate information. A longer pause. You're going to go into that corridor. It wasn't a question. Not tonight, Harry wrote, and not alone, but yes, when Quirrell moves. I'll know when he moves. He's close, 2 layers away from the mirror at most. When he makes his attempt, I need to be ahead of him, which means you go in first. Yes, before Dumbledore's trap closes. Before Dumbledore's trap closes, Harry confirmed. I don't want to be Dumbledore's contingency plan. I want to be the primary actor. The pause was the longest yet. Harry sat in the dark and waited. Okay, Bruce wrote. But you need to tell Dumbledore enough that he has the right information without telling him your plan. Why? Because if Quirrell moves while you're in there, Dumbledore needs to know to come. You need the exits covered. That's using Dumbledore as backup. That's using every available resource intelligently, Bruce wrote. I taught you to work alone when necessary, not to confuse necessary with preferable. Harry looked at that for a moment. Then, Alfred's rubbing off on you. He's been rubbing off on me for 30 years. Go talk to Dumbledore today, tell him enough. Harry put the pen away and dressed in the dark, listening to the breathing of his dormitory mates and thought about enough. Dumbledore's office was at the top of a spiral staircase behind a stone gargoyle that moved when Harry said sherbet lemon because he'd read the founding headmaster's preference for boiled sweets and taken an educated guess. The gargoyle moved. Harry walked up. Dumbledore was behind his desk when Harry knocked, and he looked up with an expression of complete unsurprise that confirmed what Bruce had said. He'd known this was coming and possibly known when. Harry, he said, sit down, would you like a sherbet lemon? No thank you. Harry sat. He looked at the room, the portraits, the instruments, the pensive on the side table. He looked at Dumbledore and read the man the way he read everything, structure underneath the surface. You know about Quirrell, Harry said. I know a great many things, Dumbledore said pleasantly. What specifically are you referring to? He's 2 layers from the stone. He'll make his move before term ends. He jinxed my broom at the Quidditch match last Saturday. Harry paused. And he's been following me because he thinks I'm investigating him, which I am. Dumbledore's expression didn't change, the depth behind it did. I see, he said in the tone of a man who had seen and was recalibrating how much. You've been thorough. I've been careful to be thorough without letting him know how thorough, Harry said. I think I've maintained that. He knows I'm curious but not how structured my understanding is. And your understanding is quite structured, Dumbledore said. Yes, silence. A portrait of a previous headmaster was watching them with undisguised interest. Outside the window, the December sky was going dark early. May I ask, Dumbledore said, what you intend to do with this thorough, structured understanding? I'm going to tell you, Harry said, that something is going to happen soon, and that you need to be available when it does, and that the north approach to the castle may be compromised by external parties whose interest in the stone is independent of Quirrell's. Dumbledore went very still. Other than that, Harry said, I think we probably understand the situation similarly and have different plans for it, and I'd rather not spend time trying to reconcile them right now. Another silence. Longer. Dumbledore folded his hands on the desk and studied Harry with the full weight of 110 years of experience assessing a problem. You are, Dumbledore said, remarkably like your father. Which one? Harry asked. The portrait headmaster made a sound. Dumbledore's eyes went bright in the way that meant something, surprise or possibly delight, or the specific thing that was both. Indeed, Dumbledore said, both I think in different ways. He paused. Harry. The stone is not mine to take or keep, I know, Harry stood. I just want to make sure it's not his either. He walked to the door. Dumbledore said, Harry, and he turned. I have made errors in my life, Dumbledore said with a quietness that cost something. One of the larger ones was designing a plan around a child without asking the child. I would like to not repeat that error. He looked at Harry over his half-moon glasses. If you find yourself in that corridor, and I believe you will, then know that I am available to be called upon, explicitly, not as a contingency, as an ally. Harry looked at him. Looked at the old man's face, and the thing behind it, which was not manipulation, was something older and more honest than that. All right, Harry said. I'll remember that. He went back down the spiral staircase and out into the corridor and stood for a moment in the December cold of the castle, with the 3rd floor above him and the grounds below him and something changing in the quality of the approaching days. The way the weather changed before a storm arrived, the specific pressure shift that meant everything that could move was about to move. He went to find Ron and Hermione. There was work to finish. Chapter 5, What Lies Beneath the Signal came on a Tuesday. Harry had been waiting for it without appearing to wait, which was the harder discipline, maintaining normal behavior while running a constant background process of assessment. He'd kept the practice sessions going. He'd attended every class. He'd played Quidditch, eaten meals, had the normal volume of conversations in the common room. From the outside, nothing had changed. From the inside, he'd been watching Quirrell's timeline compress like a spring being wound. The tell was small, it was always small. Bruce had taught him that the big dramatic signals were theater, and theater was for people who weren't paying attention. The real signals were the ones that happened in the margins. Tuesday at breakfast, Quirrell didn't eat. Not unusual in itself, Quirrell was a nervous man, and nervous men had inconsistent appetites. But Harry had been cataloging his eating patterns for 2 months, and Quirrell always ate breakfast. Not much and joylessly, but he ate. The meal was fuel, and he was functional enough to take it. This morning he sat at the staff table with an untouched plate and his hands flat on the table and his eyes somewhere else entirely. Not scanning the room, not performing the usual nervous social management. He was somewhere inside himself, running a sequence, the way a person looked when they were checking a to-do list for the last time before acting on it. Harry took a piece of toast, ate it without tasting it, and looked at Hermione. She was already looking at him, she'd seen it too. He looked at Ron. Ron was looking at his porridge, but his spoon had stopped moving, which meant he'd registered something without yet knowing what. Harry set down his toast, picked up his bag, and said at normal conversational volume, "Library before first period. I want to check that transfiguration reference." Ron's spoon started moving again. Hermione picked up her pumpkin juice. Normal, nothing interesting happening here. They met in the library alcove behind the magical theory section, which was reliably empty before 9. "Tonight," Harry said. Hermione exhaled once sharp. "You're certain?" "He's pre-running the sequence in his head. He's done. He's not gathering more information, he's finalizing." Harry paused. "He'll go after hours, probably 11 or midnight. He'll start with Fluffy, which means he has the music information. Somehow he got it." "Hagrid," Ron said flatly, "probably it doesn't matter now. What matters is the timing." Harry looked at them both. "We go in at 9, that gives us 2 hours before he moves, which is enough if we don't have problems." "And if we have problems?" Hermione asked. "Then we solve them faster than he does." Harry paused. "Hermione, the logic puzzle layer, you're confident?" "I've read Snape's paper 4 times, I understand the structure." She said it without bravado as fact. "Yes, Ron." "The chess?" Ron was quiet for a moment. He had the expression Harry had seen on him occasionally, not fear but the clear-eyed acknowledgement of something heavy that he was going to pick up anyway. "Yes. I need you both to know something," Harry said. He waited until they were both looking at him. "If something goes wrong in there, if one of you needs to turn back, you turn back. No argument, no hesitation. This isn't a situation where you push through a bad position to prove something." "And you?" Hermione asked. "I keep going." "Harry, that's not bravado," he said. "It's logistics. One of us needs to reach the end regardless of what happens to the others, and I'm the one who's spent 11 years preparing specifically for something like this. If it comes down to that choice, it's not even a difficult one." Hermione looked at him. Ron looked at the floor and then back up. "All right," Ron said in the tone of someone who didn't like a plan and was going to follow it anyway because it was correct. "One more thing." Harry reached into his bag and produced the encrypted pen. "I contacted Bruce last night. He knows we're going in tonight. If we're not back by midnight, Dumbledore gets an anonymous message that will tell him enough." He looked at the pen. "Which means we have a hard out, we don't get to take our time." "Very Batman," Ron said. "Very practical," Harry corrected. "Yes," Ron agreed. "Like I said." They spent the day in classes doing the precise impression of people who were not planning anything for the evening, which required a calibration of normal that Harry found easier than the other two, who had tells. Hermione overanswered questions in a way that suggested displaced nervous energy, and Ron was slightly too quiet, which for Ron was notable. Harry compensated by being slightly more conversational than usual, which balanced the ambient impression of the group to something that read as ordinary. Draco cornered Harry in the corridor between charms and lunch. Not aggressively, Draco had been doing this occasionally, the conversational approach rather than the adversarial one, which Harry found genuinely more interesting than the alternative. He'd been watching Draco adjust his behavior over the course of the term with the attention he gave anything that changed in a monitored environment. "You look like you're thinking about something," Draco said, falling into step beside him with the carefully casual air of someone who'd practiced the casual part. "I'm usually thinking about something," Harry said, "more than usual." Draco was quiet for a moment. "My father wrote me. There are things happening at the ministry level, things about the school." Harry glanced at him. "What kind of things?" "I don't know exactly. He doesn't say directly. He says Dumbledore is distracted and that this is a good time for people to act." Draco's voice was careful in the way of someone repeating language they don't fully trust. "I don't know what it means." "What do you think it means?" Draco was quiet long enough that it was an answer. "I think my father knows something is happening here. I think he's positioned to take advantage of it." He stopped walking, and Harry stopped too, because Draco's tone had shifted into something with weight in it. "I think whatever's happening in this school tonight or soon, I think it's something I should probably stay away from." Harry looked at him. Draco met his gaze with the complicated expression of someone whose loyalties were pulling in opposite directions and who had not yet decided which direction they would ultimately go. "That's a good instinct," Harry said. "Stay in the common room tonight. Whatever your father knows, you don't want to be between the pieces when they move." "What pieces?" Draco asked. "Stay in the common room," Harry said again and walked on. He felt Draco watching him go and thought about what it meant that Lucius Malfoy had information about tonight. It didn't change the plan, if anything it confirmed the timeline, because Lucius's information would have come from Voldemort's network, which meant the network was active and pushing Quirrell forward. The spring was fully wound, 9 o'clock. The castle after hours had a different quality than the castle during the day, not silent exactly because old buildings were never silent but stripped of its social noise down to the structural sounds. Wind in the towers. Fire settling in the grates. the portraits shifting in their frames. Harry led them to the third floor the way he'd planned the route, 2 left turns, a specific staircase, a passage behind a tapestry of dancing trolls that shaved 3 minutes off any alternative approach and avoided the stretch of corridor where the stones squeaked. He'd mapped it on a Tuesday 3 weeks ago. The corridor was dark. At the far end, a door that was slightly too large for a normal corridor, reinforced with iron bands that gleamed dully in the torchlight Harry had conjured. He kept it small and orange, warm spectrum rather than white, better for night vision, less visible from a distance. He held up a hand. They stopped. He listened. Not for sound. Sound was the last thing you caught in a situation like this. He listened for the absence of the right sounds, for the quality of silence that meant something large was breathing in it. Fluffy was behind the door, asleep. Barely the breathing had the shallow cycling of something near the surface of a light sleep, not deep under. There was music coming from somewhere, a small tinny sound, a music box left playing by someone who'd been here recently. Someone had already been here. Harry looked at the floor. In the torchlight, barely visible, the edge of a footprint in the dust near the door. Recent. And beyond it, the torchlight caught the gleam of the door handle, and the handle was turned. The door was not latched. He looked at Ron and Hermione, held up 2 fingers, then pointed at the gap in the door. Ron's face went tight. Hermione's hand moved to her wand. Harry put his palm flat on the door and pushed it open. The smell hit first, the massive animal smell of something big and warm. 3 heads. The leftmost one was snoring. The middle one was breathing slow and heavy. The rightmost was twitching, its sleep lighter than the others. The music box was on the floor, a small silver thing, still turning, still playing. And in the center of the room, the trapdoor standing open. Quirrell was already inside. Harry didn't hesitate. He pulled out his wand, pointed it at the music box, and amplified the sound, gentle, exactly calibrated, enough to push the rightmost head back down into deeper sleep without disturbing the rhythm of the others. He watched. The twitching slowed, stopped. He crossed the room in 12 steps, dropped through the trapdoor, and fell into darkness. He'd expected the drop. He'd estimated 8 to 12 feet based on the door height above and the acoustic profile of the room below. He absorbed it through bent knees and rolled, came up clean on one knee, wand already lit. Devil's snare. Everywhere, hanging from the ceiling, curling across the walls, already reaching for him in the idle, hungry way of something that found warm things and moved toward them. He reached for the cold place he kept behind his sternum, the quiet he'd built over years of training for exactly this, the practiced emptiness that wasn't peace exactly but was its functional equivalent. He stood completely still and raised his wand. Lumos Maxima. White light filled the chamber like a small sun. The devil's snare recoiled from it, pulling back hard and fast from every surface, retreating into the corners and the ceiling with a papery hiss of displeasure. A clear path opened. He heard Hermione land behind him, then Ron, both of them absorbing the drop better than they would have 3 months ago. The practice had done something real. Through, Harry said, and they went through the retreating snare before it could regroup, moving fast down the open channel his light had burned into it. The next chamber had wings. Hundreds of them, keys enchanted, the whole room a glinting chaos of flying metal, and a locked door on the far side, and on a peg by the door a broomstick. Harry went for the broom without breaking pace and mounted it and pushed off the floor. He expanded his attention to the whole room. All of it simultaneously, the pattern of the keys, the rhythm of their movement, the clustering and the spreading. Bruce had made him do awareness drills in visually cluttered environments, tracking multiple moving objects, and the skill was exactly what this needed. He found it in 11 seconds. A key near the ceiling, moving in a slightly irregular pattern, not perfectly smooth like the others, not quite keeping the rhythm. Its right wing was bent just slightly. It had been caught before. It was the one. He crossed the room in a diagonal that cut through 2 flocks of wrong keys that scattered around him, reached for the bent-winged one which jinked sideways but not fast enough, closed his fist around it, and felt the specific coolness of metal that had magic inside it. Down to the door, key and lock, door open. Fast, Hermione said behind him, not a question. Flitwick put the tell in on purpose, Harry said. Bent wing, he made it findable for someone paying attention. He moved through the door. You were right about him. The chest chamber was enormous. The pieces were the size of men. Marble cold white, already in formation across a floor that was itself a chessboard, each square large enough to stand on. The pieces had the specific quality of waiting things, still but not inert, the way a held breath was still. Ron walked past Harry and Hermione and stood at the edge of the board and was quiet for 30 seconds. Harry watched him look at it. Watched Ron's eyes move across the pieces in the specific darting pattern of someone who was reading a situation at depth, the way Harry read rooms. He'd known Ron was good at this, seeing it fully was different. Black moves first, Ron said. We're black, he turned. Harry, you're a bishop, Hermione, you're a castle. I'll take, he stopped, he looked at the board again. Knight, he said, and his voice was completely even. I'll take the knight. Ron, 7 moves, he said, looking at Hermione. We can win this in 7 moves. There's a knight sacrifice at move 5 that opens the king. After that, it's 2 moves to checkmate. He paused. A knight sacrifice. The silence had a specific weight. There's no other line, Harry asked. Not hopefully, he was asking for data. I've been running this board in my head for 3 weeks, Ron said. Every time I end up back at the same position. There's a line that avoids the sacrifice, but it takes 22 moves and it doesn't account for the board adapting. These pieces will adapt. A 22-move game gives them time to find a counter. He shook his head. 7 moves, knight sacrifice. The knight takes a hit, but it's not. He paused. Pieces aren't killed, they're removed. I'll be knocked off the board. And then, Harry asked, and then you two have a clear path. Ron looked at the door on the far side. Go, after move 5, don't wait. Hermione had her arms crossed, which was what she did instead of showing what was happening in her face. Harry looked at her. She gave him a small, tight nod. They took their positions on the board. The white pieces moved first, which meant Ron had been wrong about one thing. But he adapted immediately, not thrown by the change, just recalculating, his commands to the other pieces clear and unhurried. Harry moved when directed, holding the position he'd been given. He watched Ron play and understood something he'd known in theory but was seeing demonstrated at full size. Ron Weasley was genuinely brilliant at this, not competent. Brilliant. The kind of brilliant that looked effortless because it had been absorbed over years of practice until it became instinct, the same way Harry's physical training had. Move 3, move 4. 5, Ron said, knight to h4. Harry looked at him across the board. Ron was already looking at the relevant square, his jaw set, his face completely open and decided. The knight he was controlling moved. The white queen came hard and fast, and the impact threw Ron off the piece, and he landed on the stone floor of the chamber with a sound that made Hermione's breath stop short. He was moving, dazed, clearly one hand to his head but moving. Go, he said, and his voice was rough but steady. The path is open, go. Harry was already moving. He felt Hermione hesitate for a half-second behind him, the fraction of a second when you chose between instinct and plan. She chose plan. She ran. The flames chamber was purple on one side and black on the other, and Hermione stopped dead, and Harry heard her say "oh" in the tone she used when a problem resolved into elegance. A table, 7 bottles, and a roll of parchment. She read it in 45 seconds. Harry timed it, and then she closed her eyes for 3 seconds, which was her processing interval for complex logical structure. Then she opened them. Snape's framework, she said. He built this from the logical proof structure in the paper you gave me. She moved to the table, examined each bottle without touching them. 2 are wine, 2 are nettle wine, 1 is a forward-moving potion, 1 is a backward-moving potion. 1 is a poison. She looked at the clues on the parchment. The puzzle eliminates by position and size relationship. Give me 60 seconds. Harry gave her 60 seconds. He watched the black flames at the far door and thought about what was beyond them and what state Quirrell would be in when he found it. This one. Hermione pointed to the smallest bottle on the right. Forward, you take it. It gets you through the black flames. And back, she touched a round bottle near the center. That one. There's only 1 dose. He looked at her. She looked back with clear, direct eyes and the expression that was what she looked like when she decided something and the decision was finished. I'll go back, she said. Get Ron and get Dumbledore. You'll need time. The backwards potion takes me back through the purple flames and I go straight to Dumbledore. She paused. Harry, this is where we plan to split. I know. Is there anything you need to tell me before you go? He looked at her, at this person who'd come through Devil's Snare and Flying Keys, and a chamber of poisonous options with her mind working cleanly the entire time, who'd read Snape's paper 4 times and solved his puzzle in 60 seconds, who'd stood on a chess board while Ron took a hit and kept herself functional and ran when running was the right thing to do. You're extraordinary, Harry said. I don't say that enough. Hermione pressed her lips together in the way she did when something landed that she wasn't prepared to respond to normally. Go, she said. I'll be right behind you with Dumbledore. He picked up the small bottle, looked at it once, drank it. Cold from crown to foot, the specific cold of magic moving through you, not unpleasant, just enormous. He walked through the black flames. The last chamber was quiet. Not the quiet of an empty room. The quiet of a room with 1 person in it who was not making sound by choice. The mirror of Eris stood against the far wall, enormous, its ornate frame catching the torchlight from. There were torches here, recently lit, which meant Quirrell had been here long enough to want to see. He stood before the mirror with his back to Harry and his whole body rigid with the specific tension of a man staring at something he wanted so badly it was physical. Harry walked in and let the door close behind him. Quirrell turned. The turban was off. He was unwinding it as Harry came through the door methodically like a man taking off a mask, and what it revealed was the back of a head and the face on the back of the head, and for a moment Harry simply looked at it the way he looked at anything new, with complete and undivided attention. Voldemort's face was barely a face. White and flat, snaked into the back of Quirrell's skull like something grown rather than placed. Red eyes. slitted nostrils. The expression was the one Harry had been expecting, the expression of someone who had waited a very long time for something and was not surprised to find it within reach. What he clearly hadn't expected was Harry. "The boy," Voldemort said. His voice came from Quirrell's mouth but with a doubling quality, an echo of something underneath the human frequency. "Harry Potter, standing here instead of cowering in his dormitory." "I don't cower," Harry said, categorically. Quirrell's expression, what remained of Quirrell's expression, which was less each time Harry had seen him this term, showed something between fear and resignation. He'd been carrying this for a year. Whatever he'd hoped to get from it, whatever Voldemort had promised him, Harry could see the cost of it in every line of the man's face. "You're impressive for an 11-year-old, Voldemort said, and there was something genuine in it, which was the more unsettling option. He wasn't performing. The broom jinx was meant to remove a variable. You remained on the broom, you were not frightened." "I don't do fear on command," Harry said. "Yours or anyone else's. Everyone does fear on command, it's a biological function. Fear is a response, what you do with the response is a choice." Harry kept his eyes on Quirrell's hands and on the face at the back of his head simultaneously, because the threat could come from either. "You've been doing this your whole life, using other people's fear response as a control mechanism. It works until it doesn't. Does it look like it's failing? You're possessing a man's skull in a school basement trying to get a stone that will give you a body back," Harry said. "I've seen more impressive positions." Something crossed Voldemort's face, not anger, he was past anger. It was the recalibrating expression of a man revising his tactical assessment. "Who raised you?" "Someone who understands power," Harry said, "which means understanding its limits. Which is a concept I suspect you've missed." "Power has no limits," Voldemort said. "That is its definition." "Power has exactly the limits of your ability to maintain it," Harry said. "Which means it's dependent on the things you fear. And the thing you fear most is death, which is why you're here, which means everything you've built has been in service of a fear." He paused. "You're the most fear-driven person in this room, possibly in this country." Quirrell moved. Not attacking, moving, reaching, going for the mirror with the specific urgency of someone who'd been given an instruction telepathically, because Voldemort had decided the conversation was over. Harry was already in motion. He wasn't running at Quirrell. He was going for the mirror, not to use it, to position himself between it and Quirrell, because whatever the mirror's mechanism was, the one thing Dumbledore had designed it for was this. The right person standing in front of it with the right intent. He got there first. The mirror showed him his own face, and then it showed him more than his face, the way the mirror worked, not by reflecting the surface but by reaching into the space behind it, and what Harry saw in it was not himself older. Not himself famous, not power or wealth or safety. He saw his parents, just for a second, Lily with green eyes that matched his. James with a Quidditch scar on his jaw and a grin that Harry recognized in Ron's widest expressions. They were looking at him with the specific look of people watching something they're proud of, and his mother put one hand on the glass from the other side, and his father said something Harry couldn't hear. He held that for exactly 1 second. Then he moved his attention to the frame, to the mechanism, to the question of what the mirror was actually doing, which was. It was showing him his heart and extracting a response from it, and the response it extracted determined what it gave. He felt something settle into his palm. Smooth and round and warm in the way of stone that had been kept near a living thing. He didn't look at it. He closed his fist around it. Quirrell hit him from the left, both hands going for his throat, and the contact did something neither of them expected. Quirrell's hands started burning. Not Harry, Quirrell. The skin on his palms and fingers was blistering, reddening, the way skin burned against something impossibly hot, but Harry wasn't hot. Harry was room temperature. He could feel it. Quirrell pulled back with a sound of pain and looked at his hands with an expression of genuine shock. "What are you?" "I don't know," Harry said honestly, "but I think it's related to my mother." He pressed forward. He understood from Bruce that the moment of an opponent's surprise was the window, and the window did not stay open. He grabbed Quirrell by the wrist and held. Quirrell screamed. The burning spread up his arm in the visible way of something real and physical, the skin cracking, and Voldemort's voice was coming from the back of the head now in a continuous sound that wasn't words anymore, just the sound of something in pain and rage and something deeper than either. "Let go," Voldemort said, and the voice was in the room and also inside Harry's head, the way loud noise was inside your body. "Let go of him and I will give you anything, everything. I will give you your parents back." "You can't give me my parents," Harry said, and his voice was level. "They're gone. The only thing you can offer me is what you've built your whole existence on, the promise that fear is a fair trade for something you want." He tightened his grip. "I don't make that trade." Quirrell collapsed. It happened in stages, the knees first, then the whole body, Quirrell's hands still trying to pull free and failing, Harry holding on with both hands now, and the burning was everywhere on Quirrell's skin. And the face on the back of his head was saying things Harry couldn't process because he was somewhere past normal sensory input, past fear, in the cold, functional place where training lived. A gray smoke began rising from Quirrell. Not from his skin, from something behind his skin, through it, Voldemort being expelled by the same mechanism Harry didn't fully understand but trusted. He let go. Quirrell hit the floor and stopped moving. The smoke collected itself above the body into something that had shape and intention but no substance, the color of ash, the temperature of nothing. It hovered for a moment and the red eyes in it found Harry and Harry looked back. "I'll be back," Voldemort said in the bare minimum of voice he had left. "You understand that?" "I know," Harry said. "And I'll be ready, that's how this works." The smoke moved toward Harry through the space Harry occupied, and Harry felt it as cold, just cold. A blast of winter night cold that started at his scar and radiated outward, and then it was gone through the wall or the ceiling or somewhere, and the chamber was just a chamber, and Quirrell was on the floor, and Harry was standing in front of the mirror with a philosopher's stone in his fist. He opened his hand and looked at it. Smooth red stone, small, lighter than it should have been. He closed his fist again and sat down on the floor. Not because he was hurt, he'd check that in a moment, systematic, the way Bruce had taught him. He sat down because the operational state he'd been in for the past hour had a biological cost, and it was calling in the debt. He sat in the quiet chamber with the mirror and the fallen body of a man who had been used up by something that had lived inside him, and he breathed, and he looked at the ceiling, and he thought about the window his mother had pressed her hand against from the inside. Then he heard footsteps on the other side of the black flames, multiple sets, fast but controlled. He stood up. He faced the door. Dumbledore came through the black flames first with the kind of sustained urgency that expressed itself as speed without any visible emotion. He took in the chamber in one comprehensive sweep, Quirrell on the floor, Harry standing, the mirror, the stone in Harry's closed fist, and something moved through his face that was complicated and quiet. McGonagall came through behind him, her face white and set, and behind her Hermione, still breathing harder than normal, her eyes going straight to Harry with the specific searching look of someone checking for damage. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "He's gone," Harry said. "Voldemort. He was possessing Quirrell. I don't fully understand the mechanism, but it's broken now." "Quirrell," he looked at the man on the floor. "He needs medical attention." McGonagall was already kneeling. Her expression said she knew the prognosis and it was not good, but she was doing what needed to be done. "The stone," Dumbledore said. Harry opened his fist. The red stone sat in his palm, warm, smooth, entirely real. Dumbledore crossed the room and looked at it and did not reach for it. He looked at Harry instead, and the look was one Harry hadn't seen before on Dumbledore's face, unguarded, the way old faces went when they met something that had exceeded not just expectation but the entire framework that generated expectation. "I had a plan," Dumbledore said quietly. "I know. It did not involve you being here. I know that too," a pause. "And yet you told me enough to bring me when it mattered." Harry closed his hand around the stone again. "I told you because it was tactically correct and because," he stopped, restarted. "You said you'd be an ally, not a contingency. I held you to that." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then, with a care that was not ceremonial but real, he said, "May I take the stone?" Harry handed it over, without hesitation, without drama. He put it in Dumbledore's palm and stepped back and felt the weight of it leave his hand. "What will you do with it?" he asked. "I think," Dumbledore said, closing his fingers around the stone, "that Nicholas and I will have a conversation about priorities. He is quite old enough to consider the question of whether immortality is everything he has imagined." He paused. "He will agree eventually. He was always reasonable." "And Voldemort?" "Alive," Dumbledore said, "in some form, diminished as you found him, not destroyed." His voice was even. "I will not lie to you about that." "I didn't expect you to," Harry said. "Not tonight." Hermione had crossed the room and was standing beside Harry with the close but not touching proximity of someone who wants to confirm physical presence without making it a thing. He glanced at her. "Ron," he said. "Awake. McGonagall sent him to the hospital wing 20 minutes ago. Madame Pomfrey says it's a concussion." Her voice was controlled and factual, which meant she'd been worried and had organized the worry into facts. "He's annoyed about missing this. Tell him the chess was the most important part," Harry said. "I will. He'll be impossible about it. He's earned it." Dumbledore was watching them with the expression Harry now recognized as the one he wore when he was seeing something real rather than something he'd predicted. It wasn't quite wistfulness. Closer to the look of a man who had been running a very long calculation and had finally looked up from it long enough to notice the world the calculation was about. Harry met his gaze. "We need to talk. Properly, not just what I offer you and what you decide to give me." He paused. "About what you planned for me before this year." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, "we do." He didn't look away. "I think I owe you that." I think so too, Harry said, not angry, not demanding, just steady the way he was steady about most things, the bedrock quality that Bruce had built into him over 11 years of refusing to treat fear as a foundation. McGonagall stood from beside Quirrell with a face that had made its decision. Infirmary, she said, in the voice that moved mountains. Now, all of you, including you, Harry, Madame Pomfrey, and then questions. Yes, Professor, Harry said. She looked at him, then at the mirror. Then at the empty floor where Quirrell had fallen. Then back at this 11-year-old boy who had walked into the deepest chamber in the castle and walked out again with a philosopher's stone and no visible injuries and the absolutely unreasonable composure of someone who had done something difficult and considered it Tuesday. 10 points, she said, which was clearly not what she'd started to say. For Gryffindor? Harry asked. 4, yes, for Gryffindor. An absurdly insufficient number of points, but the scale, I'll need to recalibrate the scale. She ushered them toward the door with the brisk efficiency of someone organizing an event they'd never expected to have to organize. Move. They went back through the black flames and the purple flames and the chess chamber where Ron's knight still stood empty at H4, and the bottle room and the flying keys chamber and the devil's snare vault, and finally the trapdoor and Fluffy's corridor where the music box was still turning, and out into the warm stone air of a castle that was full of sleeping people who didn't know yet what had happened in the floors below their feet. Harry climbed the staircase from the 3rd floor to the 4th, and then to the 5th, and then to the 7th where the hospital wing was, and walked beside Hermione through the quiet corridors with the torches burning low in their brackets, and thought about a face in a mirror pressing a hand to glass from the inside, and didn't say anything about it and didn't need to. Some things were yours to keep. Madame Pomfrey's diagnosis was entirely too much for one evening, which she delivered with clinical precision, while making him sit on a bed and drink a restorative potion that tasted like copper and turned immediately into warmth. Ron was in the next bed with his eyes open and a bandage on his head and the expression of someone who was deeply interested in what had happened and was being prevented from getting up to find out by the dual forces of Madame Pomfrey and a mild concussion. Well, Ron said. Stone's secure, Harry said. Quirrell's down. Voldemort's gone temporarily, not permanently. Right, Ron absorbed this. And the chess. Won it in 7 moves. The sacrifice worked. Ron's expression did the thing where satisfaction tried to be modest and the modesty lost. I knew it would. You did, Harry said. Was it? Ron stopped and his voice was slightly different. Did the queen piece? The knight, Harry said. Your knight stood where you'd fallen after. The piece kept the position. He paused. The board recognized the sacrifice. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once to himself and settled back against his pillow with the expression of someone who had done the right thing and had no regrets about it and was going to let that be the entire statement. Hermione was on the far bed, not because she needed it, Pomfrey had cleared her, but because she was sitting with Ron, their chairs pulled close. Both of them talking quietly about nothing in particular in the way people talked about nothing when the something had been very large. Harry lay back on his own bed and looked at the ceiling of the hospital wing and felt the restorative potion working through him, and listened to his friends' voices in the dark, and let the operational part of his brain stand down one layer at a time carefully, the way you came down from any high-stress state, deliberately, not all at once. Through the window at the end of the ward, the sky was lightening. The first gray of before dawn, Gotham's color, the color of the hour before things started happening. He thought about the stone in Dumbledore's hand, about Voldemort's voice saying I'll be back and meaning it, about Quirrell's face in the moments before everything ended. He thought about the real work that was still ahead, not the stone, not Quirrell, not this year. The longer arc. Voldemort would come back. In what form, with what resources, Harry didn't yet know. But he was coming back, and the interval between now and then was preparation time, and Harry intended to use every second of it. He thought about what Bruce had said in the earliest days of serious training, when Harry was 7 and had gotten frustrated at how slow real skill built. Bruce had sat down across from him on the mat and said, "You're not preparing for the fight in front of you. You're preparing for the one after that, and the one after that, and the one you can't see yet. That's the only fight that matters." He'd understood it intellectually then. He understood it differently now, having stood in a basement chamber and looked at Tom Riddle's face and not looked away. The sky outside was going from gray to the faint possible blue of an early morning that might become something. Harry closed his eyes. He slept. Chapter 6. The meaning of the scar. Harry woke to the sound of someone entering the hospital wing who was not supposed to be there. He knew before he opened his eyes. The specific quality of the footsteps, measured, deliberate. The practiced quiet of someone who had spent years moving through spaces they weren't officially occupying. He'd know those footsteps in a burning building. He'd know them underwater. He opened his eyes. Bruce Wayne was standing at the end of the hospital ward in a charcoal suit with his hands in his pockets, looking at Harry with the expression he used for things that mattered, which was to say almost no expression at all, just a quality of attention so focused it had weight. Harry sat up. "You came," Harry said. "I was in Scotland already." Bruce's voice was even. He crossed the ward in 8 steps and stood beside the bed and looked at Harry with the systematic thoroughness of a man doing a damage assessment and trying to keep his feelings out of the methodology. "Madame Pomfrey's report said no serious injury. She's right. She also said you walked in under your own power and your vitals were," her exact words were, "unnervingly stable for what he's apparently been through." She seemed bothered by that. She seemed like a person who's used to children coming through that door badly damaged and didn't know what to do with the alternative. Bruce paused. "How do you actually feel?" It wasn't a standard question. It was the question Bruce asked when he wanted a real answer, and the two of them had a long-standing arrangement where that question got one. Harry thought about it honestly. "Tired," he said, "not hurt." The tiredness is the good kind, the kind that means the work is done, not the kind that means something's wrong. He paused. "I saw them in the mirror, Mum and Dad." Bruce was quiet. "Just for a second," Harry said. "I didn't let it pull me, but I saw them." He looked at his hands. She put her hand on the glass from the inside, a silence that had its own structure, not empty, full of something that Bruce was choosing how to carry. "I know I didn't know them," Harry said. "Not really. I was 1 year old," but he stopped. "You know what you lost," Bruce said. "It wasn't a correction, it was recognition." "Yeah," Harry looked up. "I know what you lost too, it's different. We both know it's different, but it's adjacent, the shape of it." Bruce sat down on the chair beside the bed, which was the most relaxed Harry had seen him in a medical setting in 11 years, because Bruce's relationship with hospital chairs was purely adversarial. He sat on this one like it was a choice he was making. "I spent a long time," Bruce said, "making Thomas and Martha Wayne's deaths the engine of everything I did. Every night, every case, every piece of training. The engine ran hot. It ran well." He looked at the window at the morning outside. "I'm not going to tell you that's wrong because it produced results and I'm not in the habit of calling results wrong." "But," Harry said, "but you're not me, and I've been thinking about that since October 1981. Bruce looked back at him. "What I built was a machine for justice that ran on grief. It works, the costs are real." He paused. "I don't want you to build the same machine." "What do I build instead?" "I don't know," Bruce said. "I've been watching you figure it out and I think you're ahead of me on it, actually." He said it without any self-consciousness, which was one of the things Harry had always valued about him. He could acknowledge the truth of a comparison without it costing him anything. "The way you talked about your friends tonight, the way you thought about Quirrell, the distinction you made between what he was and what was using him." He paused. "That's not the machine I built. He was a person," Harry said, "a frightened person who made a terrible choice. That's worth acknowledging even if it doesn't change what needed doing." "Yes," Bruce's voice had something in it. "That's exactly what I mean." They sat for a moment in the early morning quiet of the hospital wing. Ron was asleep in the next bed, his breathing slow and regular. Hermione had apparently been directed home by Madame Pomfrey at some point in the night, which was the only instruction of Pomfrey's she'd ever followed without argument, which meant she'd been more tired than she'd shown. "Voldemort's alive," Harry said. "Not in any useful form, but alive. He'll be back." "I know," Bruce looked at him. "Timeline? Years probably. He's very diminished. Whatever form he takes next, he'll need time to build." Harry paused. "But his network isn't diminished. His followers are still operational. The ones who weren't imprisoned, some of them claimed coercion, got off, went back into society. They're waiting." "I've been building files on the ones with international connections," Bruce said, "for the past 5 years. Harry looked at him. "Show me when I'm home." "Obviously," Bruce leaned back slightly, "the Malfoy family specifically. Lucius Malfoy made contact with a League of Shadows operative 18 months ago. The relationship didn't develop. The League found him too transactional, but the attempt tells us something about his positioning." "He's hedging," Harry said. "Multiple power structures. He wants influence regardless of who wins." "Yes, he's intelligent and adaptable, which makes him more dangerous than a true believer." "Draco's not him," Harry said. "I want to say that clearly." Bruce studied him. "You've been watching the boy. He came to the Gryffindor common room on his own and told me his father had information about something happening at the school. That took real nerve. He was warning me in the only way he could do it without being disloyal to his family." Harry paused. "He's in a very difficult position. He's been given one framework for the world his whole life and it doesn't hold up to examination. That's not his fault. It becomes his fault if he chooses it anyway, knowing it doesn't hold." "I know we're not there yet." Harry looked at the ceiling. "I'm not writing him off. He's worth more than that." Bruce was quiet for a moment. "You sound like Alfred," he said. "Alfred sounds like Alfred. I sound like someone Alfred raised." Harry almost smiled. "There's a distinction, a fine one. He'd say the distinction matters." He would, Bruce agreed. And he'd be right, as usual, which he would also say. Alfred arrived at 11 in the morning with a hamper. There was no other word for it. It was a wicker hamper, properly packed, with a checked cloth over the top and a card attached that said hospital food is a moral failing in Alfred's handwriting. And inside it were sandwiches, proper ones, and a thermos of tea and treacle tart, and a small pot of what turned out to be Alfred's chicken soup, which Harry had once told Alfred was the best thing he'd ever eaten and had spent 3 years trying to get Alfred to admit the recipe to. Alfred handed the soup to Ron first, who was awake and upright and looking much better, and Ron received it with the expression of someone being handed something by a person who understood the deep seriousness of the situation. "Thank you," Ron said, and he meant it in multiple layers. "You're welcome," Alfred said, in the way he said things when he also meant multiple layers. He looked at the bandage on Ron's head. "Concussion, I understand." "Yeah, worth it." "Best things usually are." Alfred settled in a chair that he'd relocated from the corner with the efficiency of someone who made spaces function, and looked at Ron with the warm directness he turned on people he decided he approved of. "Your mother has been told you're in the hospital wing. She's written twice. The owl is outside. I believe it's waiting for a response." Ron's face went through several things. "How did she? The school contacts families," Harry said from his own bed. "Standard procedure." "Right," Ron looked at the soup. "She's going to. She'll be worried," Alfred said. "Mothers often are when their children do extraordinary things. It comes with the territory." He said it with the tone of a man who understood this from a specific angle. Ron looked at him. Are you his?" He gestured at Harry. "Alfred Pennyworth," Alfred said. "I manage the household and other things." He tilted his head slightly. "I understand you played a rather decisive game of chess last night." Ron straightened. 7 moves. The knight sacrifice." "Yes." Alfred nodded with the air of someone confirming something they'd already respected. "Classical endgame theory, rare to see it applied in practical conditions under pressure at your age." He paused. "Well done." Ron looked at Alfred for a moment with the expression of someone receiving a specific kind of acknowledgement from a specific kind of person, the kind that didn't come often and meant something when it did. "Thank you," he said again, and this time there were even more layers. Harry watched Alfred work the room. That was the only way to describe it, because Alfred moved through social situations the way he moved through kitchens, with total command that wore the face of absolute ease. By the time Hermione arrived at noon, her hair still slightly wild from sleeping somewhere in the castle rather than being directed home as previously believed, Alfred had extracted Ron's entire chess history, asked 3 pointed questions about his strategic influences, and established that Mrs. Weasley's owl was in fact outside the window and should probably be acknowledged before it took matters into its own hands. Hermione stopped in the doorway and looked at Alfred sitting in the hospital wing chair drinking tea from a proper cup he'd brought himself, and then at Harry, and then back at Alfred. "Alfred Pennyworth," Harry said. "Hermione Granger." Alfred stood, he always stood, and regarded Hermione with the expression he turned on things he found genuinely impressive. "The logic puzzle," he said. 60 seconds, I understand." Hermione blinked. "Harry told you?" "Harry tells me the important things." Alfred gestured to the hamper. "Sit down, there are sandwiches. The tart has Ron's fingerprints on it already, so exercise judgment about the far end." Hermione sat down beside Harry's bed, accepted a sandwich, and looked at Alfred with the evaluative attention she gave anyone who moved into her world. And then the evaluation finished, and she relaxed in the way she relaxed when she decided someone was trustworthy. It took her about 45 seconds. Alfred, Harry knew, had been working for that result since she walked through the door. "You raised him," Hermione said to Alfred, "not a question." "I was significantly involved," Alfred said with the precise calibration that was his version of modesty. "Bruce did the harder work." "The training," Hermione said. "And the other things," Alfred said, "the things that are harder to name than training." He looked at Harry with the look Harry had been receiving all his life, the one that combined deep satisfaction with the clean absence of sentimentality. The parts that were already there, those were his. Harry looked at his sandwich. "You're making me sound more impressive than I am." "I'm making you sound exactly as impressive as you are," Alfred said, "which is a service I provide since you consistently underperform in that area. I prefer to let results speak." "Your results speak volumes," Alfred said. "It's the speaking about them you resist." He sipped his tea. "That's also a Wayne trait, incidentally. I've been correcting it in both directions for 30 years. Dumbledore came in the early afternoon. He came alone, without McGonagall's structural support, without the trappings of his office. Just the purple robes and the half-moon glasses and the silver beard, and he moved through the hospital wing with the care of someone who understood they were entering a different kind of territory. He stopped at the foot of Harry's bed. He looked at Bruce, who had returned from whatever he'd been doing in the castle, touring it, Harry suspected, because Bruce didn't sit still, and a castle full of a century of architectural choices would be professionally interesting to him. Bruce was in the chair beside Harry's bed and made no move to vacate it. Dumbledore looked at Alfred. Alfred looked back with the expression he used on people who were operating complex agendas, not hostile, just completely aware. "I see," Dumbledore said, which seemed to cover several assessments simultaneously. He pulled up a chair because there was nothing else to do and sat across from Harry with the quality of attention that made conversations with him feel like events. Ron and Hermione were there too, which Dumbledore accepted without any attempt to clear the room. Harry noticed this and noted it as a choice. "I owe you a conversation," Dumbledore said to Harry. "Yes," Harry said, "you do." "Then I'll have it." He settled his hands on his knees and looked at Harry over the half-moon glasses. "When you were 1 year old, I placed you on a doorstep in Surrey. Or rather, I tried to. The subsequent events are, I understand, something you know." "I know what I know," Harry said. "Tell me what you know." Dumbledore inclined his head. "I had a plan. It was, I believed, a good plan, the product of considerable experience and genuine care for your safety. It involved protecting you within your mother's family, within blood wards that would have been very difficult to breach, until the time when Voldemort returned and your specific quality became relevant." "My specific quality," Harry said. "You carry something in you that I cannot fully explain," Dumbledore said. "The night Voldemort's curse rebounded, something happened that I believe was not an accident. Your mother died to protect you. That act, the magic of it, the specific sacrifice left a mark, not just the scar." He paused. "Something in Voldemort was shattered that night, pieces of it scattered, I believe, and I cannot be entirely certain that a piece of it went into you." The hospital wing was very quiet. "A piece of Voldemort," Harry said. "A piece of his soul," Dumbledore said. "Or what remains of his soul, which is not, it is not a comfortable thing to say to you. I want to be clear that I know that." "What does it mean?" Hermione asked. She was leaning forward with her notebook in her lap, quill out, and she'd been writing for the past 30 seconds with the focused energy of someone turning disturbing information into something they could examine and therefore manage. "It means Harry has a connection to Voldemort that is unlike anything I have encountered," Dumbledore said. "A connection in both directions. Voldemort, when he is strong enough, may sense Harry's emotions. Harry, conversely, may sense Voldemort's." He paused. "The scar is the seat of it." Harry put his hand to his forehead. The scar had ached last night, not pain exactly, more like pressure. He'd noted it and filed it and kept going. "Is it removable?" "Possibly," Dumbledore said. "In time, under specific conditions, I don't know yet." He met Harry's eyes. "I have been learning the answer to that question for 10 years and I am not finished." "What did you plan to do with it?" Harry said. "In the original plan, the doorstep plan." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The quiet had a quality, the quality of a man deciding to say an honest thing. "I planned," Dumbledore said, "to allow the situation to develop, to keep you safe until Voldemort returned." And then he stopped. "I had a theory about how the connection might be resolved. It was a theory I was not certain of, and its resolution was not comfortable." Bruce had said nothing throughout this. He was sitting completely still in the chair beside Harry with his hands on the armrests and his eyes on Dumbledore, and his stillness had the quality of contained intention, a man who was listening to every word and holding the responses until they were needed. "Tell me the theory," Harry said. "In time," Dumbledore said. "Not today. The theory requires more certainty than I currently have. And I have learned somewhat forcibly in the past 12 hours that you are not a piece on a board. You are a person who thinks better than most adults and acts more decisively than most people I've known in a century of knowing people." He paused. "I would like to earn the right to have that conversation with you by demonstrating first that I can be honest about what I don't know as well as what I do." Harry studied him. The old face across from him was not performing. He'd learned to read performance, and this was not it. This was a man genuinely in the process of recalibrating something, which was, Harry knew, the harder thing for powerful people than for ordinary ones. "All right," Harry said. "In time." Dumbledore released a breath that was very slight but visible. "The Philosopher's Stone has been destroyed," he said. "I spoke with Nicholas this morning. He was, as I predicted, reasonable about it. He and Perenelle have made their peace." "Good," Harry said. "It was the right call." "It was," Dumbledore agreed. "Voldemort cannot reconstitute through it now." He paused. "He will find other means. He is patient and he is inventive and he has, as I have told you, followers who have been waiting. This is not over." "I know," Harry said. "I told him so, actually." Dumbledore blinked. "I beg your pardon. He told me he'd be back. I told him I'd be ready." It seemed like the accurate thing to say. Another silence. Dumbledore looked at Harry and then for the first time at Bruce, and the look between them was something Harry couldn't fully decode. Two people who had each built something significant and were recognizing each other across the distance between their architectures. "You did well," Dumbledore said to Bruce. "I want to say that plainly." He did well, Bruce said. I handed him tools. What he built with them is his. Dumbledore nodded. I would be pleased, he said carefully, if next year's engagement could be approached as something more collaborative between all of us. Define collaborative, Bruce said. Full information sharing when safe to share. Input on decisions that affect Harry's training and development, and the understanding that Harry's choices are his own. He looked at Harry. Not mine, not yours, his. Bruce looked at Harry. Harry looked at Bruce. There was a conversation in that look that the room had to wait for. Yes, Harry said, on those terms. Bruce nodded once. Agreed. Dumbledore stood, and there was in the motion the particular quality of a man who had been holding something heavy and has set it down, and is feeling the relief of that without quite letting himself show it. He looked at Ron, who had been watching all of this with the expression of someone at a very high-level chess game trying to track every piece. 50 points to Gryffindor, Dumbledore said. For each of you, for exceptional courage, tactical intelligence, and a quality of cooperation that I believe is somewhat unprecedented in this school's history. Ron looked at the ceiling. We win the House Cup now, he said, somewhat dazed. By a significant margin, Dumbledore confirmed, with the warmth he kept for moments that deserved it. The end-of-year feast should be interesting. He left. The hospital wing felt slightly different after, not emptier exactly but reorganized, the way rooms felt after something that had been taking up invisible space had been addressed. Piece of soul, Ron said into the silence. In your, yes, Harry said. And your, I mean, how are you processing it, Harry said. I'll be processing it for a while, that's fine. He paused. It explains the scar aching when Quirrell was near. It explains some things about the connection to Voldemort that I'd been trying to account for. And the fact that it might be, Hermione stopped, because she'd written everything Dumbledore had said and was now looking at her notes with the expression of someone who was thinking 3 levels ahead and didn't like where 2 of the levels led. Say it, Harry said. He was going to say it might be a problem, the piece of soul. She looked up. That its resolution might require something from you specifically. Yes, Harry said, I know. He said it calmly, which was how he said most things, and it wasn't performance. The calm was real, the product of sitting in the hospital wing in the early afternoon and having decided something. I know he was going to say that. And when he knows enough to say it properly, I'll hear it, and then I'll figure out what to do with it. What if what he has to say is, Hermione, Harry said, I stood in front of Voldemort last night without an adequate defense against what he is and held my ground and sent him away diminished. I think I can handle an uncomfortable conversation about what's in my scar. He paused. When the time comes, she looked at him. Then she closed her notebook with a precision that meant she was choosing to close it consciously, putting the problem away. All right, she said. When the time comes. Bruce stood up. I need to make some calls, he said, which in Bruce's language meant he was going to find somewhere private and do 3 hours of encrypted communication with people in various countries about things that were now more urgent than they'd been yesterday. He looked at Harry. I'll be back for dinner. Alfred's already planning it, Harry said. Obviously. He looked at Alfred. Alfred looked back. The gargoyle on the 3rd floor landing has a pressure sensor in the left foot, Bruce said. Someone put it there within the last 6 months. Alfred's expression didn't change. I'll make a note. Not Dumbledore's work, different method. Understood. Could be dormant, could be active. Worth tracking. I'll look into it, Alfred said. Bruce nodded and left, his footsteps going away down the corridor with the quiet precision Harry had learned to identify as Bruce being careful in an unfamiliar building, which was a specific subset of Bruce being careful in general. Hermione watched him go. He's Batman, she said. Hermione, I'm not asking. She looked at Harry. I've been thinking about it since Halloween and the evidence is conclusive. I'm not going to mention it again. I just wanted you to know that I know and I'm fine with it, and also it explains a frankly extraordinary number of things about you. Harry looked at her. You're not going to. Of course not, she opened her notebook again. Ron figured it out in October. Harry looked at Ron. Ron shrugged. The pen thing, he said, and the way you move and the way you think and the whole general. He made a gesture that encompassed Harry's entire existence. Also, Fred actually did Google it, sorry. You mentioned the Google thing, Harry said. We're still sorry. It's fine, Harry said, and then because it was and they were and this was the shape of things now, I'm glad you know. Both of you. The end-of-year feast happened on a Thursday evening, and the Great Hall had the specific energy of a place where 400 people had been told something dramatic had happened, but not the details, which generated a quality of collective anticipation that flavored everything. Gryffindor won the House Cup. Dumbledore announced the additional points, and the hall erupted in a way that had happened before and would happen again, but felt each time like the first time, which was what genuine celebration felt like from the inside. Ron looked at the ceiling again with the expression of a man receiving something he'd wanted for a long time and had been careful not to want too obviously. Harry watched him and felt something warm and uncomplicated, which was one of his favorite things that Ron generated. Draco Malfoy, across the hall at the Slytherin table, sat with his arms crossed and watched the Gryffindor table celebrate. Then his eyes found Harry and Harry met them across the room. A long moment. Draco's jaw worked. Then he gave a small, brief nod, not congratulatory exactly, more like acknowledgement, the gesture of someone marking a thing as real before deciding what to do with it. Harry nodded back. Draco looked away. Harry went back to his dessert. Later, after the feast, in the corridor on the way back to Gryffindor Tower, Neville fell into step beside Harry with the tentative energy of someone who had something specific to say. "I heard," Neville said quietly. I mean the whole school has heard something, not the real thing I don't think, but enough." He paused. "Fluffy's corridor." "Yes," Harry said. Neville was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about something since September," he said. "Since the first practice session you did with Hermione and Ron, I wondered," he stopped, rebuilt. "I wondered if there was room in those sessions for someone else." Harry looked at him. "I know I'm not like them," Neville said with the directness of someone who'd had a lot of time to think about what they were and had stopped being wounded by it. "I'm not quick the way Hermione is or the way you are. I panic in the moment, I know that." He met Harry's eyes with a steadiness that was its own kind of impressive. "But I want to learn not to." "The moment in the bathroom," Harry said. "That was me, different troll, different circumstances, same result." Neville paused. "I don't want to keep being the person who panics." Harry thought about Bruce's rule about team composition. You didn't build a team of identical capabilities. You built a team where each person's capability addressed a gap in someone else's. "Next year," Harry said. "First practice, you're in." Neville exhaled in a way that had been held for a while. "Right," he said. "Right, okay." And then with the careful casualness of someone trying not to make it a bigger thing than it was, "Thank you. You don't need to thank me for something I want to do," Harry said. "You'll be useful." Neville looked at him. "I will." "Herbology knowledge is practically applicable to half the situations we're likely to encounter," Harry said. "And you notice things quietly. That's a skill a lot of people with loud capabilities don't have." Neville stared at him for another moment. Then he nodded, pulled himself together with the visible effort of someone who had been told something that they needed to arrange themselves around, and went ahead to the portrait hole with the particular walk of a person whose spine had found an extra quarter-inch. Harry watched him go and thought about what Alfred had said once. When Harry was 9 and hadn't understood why Bruce insisted on bringing in people with different skills rather than simply developing everything himself. "Because a single perfect machine is just one thing that can break," Alfred had said. "People who care about each other and cover each other's gaps are something else entirely. They're harder to break, and when they do break, they rebuild." The last morning at Hogwarts arrived with sunshine, which felt like the castle making an effort. Harry packed his trunk with the same methodical approach he applied to everything. Books first, practical items accessible at the top. The notebook in the inner pocket of his jacket rather than the trunk because it was going with him as a working document, not a stored one. He'd made a new section at the back last night. Long header underlined twice, Year 2, Preparation. Underneath it in smaller writing, what I know about Voldemort's return vectors, what I know about his network, what I don't know, what I need to learn. The list of what he didn't know was considerably longer than the list of what he did, which Harry found encouraging rather than discouraging, because an honest accounting of ignorance was the first step toward addressing it. He checked the dormitory one more time because he always checked twice. He found Ron's chest set under the bed, which Ron had packed and somehow also lost, and left it on Ron's pillow. He found one of Hermione's quills between the floorboards of the staircase landing, which he pocketed to return. The Hogwarts Express was at the station. The platform was the organized chaos of departure, trunks, owls, students, families arriving for the Muggle side of things. Harry navigated it with Alfred on one side, carrying nothing because Alfred had arranged the trunk through some mechanism Harry had learned not to question, and Bruce on the other, in the good suit that he wore when he was being Bruce Wayne rather than Batman and wanted people to register it. The Weasley family had arrived in force. Mrs. Weasley was a compact woman with red hair and an expression of someone who was simultaneously relieved and preparing to express the relief loudly. And she caught Ron in a hug that lifted him several inches and held on. Ron endured this with the resigned affection of someone who had built his tolerance for maternal intensity over 16 years of calibration. Harry watched from a few feet away and felt something that wasn't quite envy, more like appreciation at close range. Mr. Weasley, beside his wife, had the kind face of someone who worked at something he believed in and was at peace with the smallness of his salary relative to the importance of the work. And he caught Harry's eye over Ron's head and gave him a nod that was warm and particular, the nod of a person who knew more than they were saying and was choosing to simply be glad about the outcome. Harry nodded back. Hermione's parents were waiting near the barrier. Her mother had Hermione's face on her, the same precision in the eyes, the same way of listening that was total and present. Her father was taller and quieter, and had the expression of a man who had met his daughter's mind in childhood and had been impressed and slightly overtaken by it ever since, and was entirely fine with this. They caught Harry looking and gave him the collective nod of parents who had heard a great deal about someone and were reassessing based on the original data. Harry gave a small wave. Hermione, intercepted by her mother, gave him the look over her mother's shoulder that communicated, "We'll write, we'll plan, we'll reconvene." He nodded, they would. Alfred had found an unoccupied section of platform and was standing in it with the ease of a man who made space efficient by existing in it correctly. Bruce was beside him, watching the crowd with the habit that was so deeply built into him that Harry sometimes thought he did it in his sleep. Harry joined them. "Good year," Alfred said. "It was eventful," Harry said. "Eventful is a good year, uneventful is an ordinary one." Alfred handed him an envelope. "From Nicholas Flamel. He wanted you to have it." Harry looked at the envelope. His name was on the front in handwriting that had the quality of someone who had been refining their penmanship for several centuries. He opened it. Inside was a single card, on it in the same refined hand, "The greatest alchemy is not the making of gold. It is the making of purpose. You appear to have found yours already. I hope you keep it." And below that a small symbol, a circle with a triangle inside it and a line through it. Harry recognized it, the Deathly Hallows mark. He turned the card over, nothing on the back. He put it in his jacket pocket beside the notebook. "Ready?" Bruce asked. Harry looked at the platform at the station. At the train disappearing into the distance with Ron and Hermione on it. At the sky above London, which was the complicated city sky of too many buildings and not enough room, which was also somehow the most comfortable sky he knew. He thought about the stone in the mirror and the face in the mirror and what Dumbledore had said about a piece of Voldemort's soul and the list in the back of his notebook and Neville's voice saying, "I want to learn not to panic," and Draco's nod across the Great Hall and Ron's night standing empty at H4. He thought about what came next. Not with dread, not with the grim, grinding weight of someone carrying an obligation they'd been assigned. With the specific forward-looking quality of a person who has found the thing therefore and is interested in what it asks of them. "Yes," Harry said. "Ready." They moved through the barrier together, Harry first, then Alfred, then Bruce, out into King's Cross on the other side, the ordinary world with its ordinary noise and its ordinary people who didn't know about what had happened underneath a Scottish castle, which was how it should be and also, Harry thought, temporary. The wizarding world was going to change. The storm that had been building since before Harry was born was not over. It was between events, gathering, restructuring, finding its next shape. Voldemort was somewhere diminished and waiting and working, and his followers were walking through ministry halls with clean records and dirty hands, and the structures that were supposed to protect people had the same failures in them that any structure had when the people running them chose comfort over vigilance. Harry was 11 years old. He had a year of Hogwarts behind him and a scar on his forehead and a piece of something terrible that he carried without knowing yet what it meant. And he had people, real ones, chosen ones, the kind that showed up in hospital wings and on chessboards and in empty classrooms on Saturday mornings. And he had the training of a man who had turned grief into architecture and the wisdom of a man who had spent 60 years understanding what that was worth and what it cost. He had what he had. He would learn what he needed. And the thing that had called itself Lord Voldemort, that had built an empire of fear on a foundation of his own terror at the dark, would come back eventually in whatever form it found, and when it did it would find that the 11-year-old boy who had stood in front of its ghost in a basement and not looked away had not in the intervening time been idle. Harry walked out of King's Cross into the London afternoon. There was work to do. He was looking forward to it. 2 days later, in a summer study Bruce had set up in the Manor's East Wing, Harry opened his notebook to the Year 2 section and began to write. He wrote for 3 hours. When he stopped, he had 4 pages of structured analysis, 9 questions that didn't have answers yet, 2 hypotheses about Voldemort's likely return vectors, and 1 note at the bottom that had nothing to do with strategy. It said, "Ron's birthday is March 1st. Alfred will know what to make." He closed the notebook and went to find Bruce. There was work to do and there were also people to be, and Harry Wayne had decided, somewhere in the space between a mirror and a morning, that these were not different things. They were the same thing, and that was the point.